This is Bloomberg Surveillance with Tom Keene and Paul Sweeney.
Are these stocks under-owned by institutional Wall Street?
A lot of these companies talking about generative AI.
With Lisa Mateo on markets.
Investors just worried about the ongoing sales slump in China.
And Michael Barr with news.
A ship traveling through the southern Red Sea has been attacked.
The best in economics, finance, investment, and international relations. This is Bloomberg Surveillance on Bloomberg Radio.
Good morning, everyone. Tom Keene, Paul Sweeney, Michael Barr, Lisa Mateo on assignment for the terminal.
Yes.
High demand. She's traveling all
What's
over the world.
this assignment? It sounds
She's
like
on
a scam.
assignment.
No.
It's
I think she's up in Boston doing something.
Oh, she's in Boston?
right.
Yeah, I think she's generating revenue for
It's going to be like 85 degrees there. It's like
Yeah, I
when
know.
she was in Los Angeles at the
Exactly.
Beverly Hills Hilton. And,
Yep, of course.
you know, John Tucker pulls a short straw. He'll be with us. It was successful yesterday. We survived. We say good morning to all of you. I wish I could show you the miracle of the Bloomberg terminal. If you go and there's a code that you have to memorize, Robert Teeter's memorized it, NI space ERN. And it's like the Wall Street Journal back page 40 years ago.
Oh, that's
in
right.
a blur
Yep.
in real time of all the earnings dump and the headline dump.
Yep.
And it's all the names we don't talk about, folks. We only talk about 6 stocks. That's the rule of surveillance. Garmin, ADP out, Biogen out, Kraft Heinz out, Bausch & Lomb out. You wear their glasses.
Of course,
don't you?
I do.
You style
And
at the
contacts
beach.
as well.
But the earnings season's there, and as Julian Emanuel over at Evercore says, win up, lose down, like we see with Lilly this morning.
Yep. We were talking about McDonald's earlier today. I'm just looking at that NI space ERN. Shake Shack, 3Q. Pro
Why did
forma
we both
adjusted
go to
EPS,
the same stock?
25
I don't understand that.
Estimate was 20 cents. So, I mean, McDonald's, they're doing okay. Shake Shacks, they're doing fine. People are buying their burgers.
There's Shake Shack there, 113 close right now, indicating it's a pretty broad indication. I don't have a good price yet. Revenues in on plan. Excuse me, I got the plague, folks. I'm getting over it. Stay with me. I'm medicated. Comp sales up 4.4% at Shake Shack.
Yeah. I think
Getting it done.
it's a good burger.
It's
a good burger.
organic
Yes.
revenue growth.
Right, organic. There's
So wait-
nothing organic in the burgers, though.
So there's your Dow component Shake Shack. We'll have much more. Of course, this afternoon, some serious earnings from Microsoft like we saw with Google. Let's get right to it so we can talk to Mr. Teeter here from the Interactive Brokers Studios, our Bloomberg Business Flash. We do with John Tucker.
All right, let's start with Lilly then, down 11% pre-market. So Zepbound sales were $1.26 billion in the quarter. That's shy of the estimates of $1.63 billion. Eli Lilly lowering its full-year guidance. After the NASDAQ closed at a record, NASDAQ Composite Index futures this morning, they're mixed. This morning, pre-market shares of Google, parent Alphabet, up over 5%. Revenue and profit exceeding expectations. They reported after the close. Their investments in AI also paying off. Next up, for the Mag 7, Meta Platforms, Microsoft, they report at will close a regular trading today. Also, let's sometimes considered to be a bellwether. Caterpillar weighing on Dow futures this morning, posting a third quarter profit that missed expectations. They see weakening demand in construction around the world. And let me finish with Humana, third quarter profit exceeding Wall Street expectations. All right, I'll throw in Biogen raising their full year adjusted earnings per share forecast range as well. Gold hit a fresh record early today as traders weigh potential market disruption ahead of the election. And a commodity guy, Mike McGlone of BI, writing this morning, crude oil faces strong headwinds. A low price cure might not come until $40 a barrel.
Oh, boy. That's below the cost of production.
He's been out with that.
He has been.
And the problem is his vector, the McGlone vector's correct. It's south.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's that south, but there it is. We're going to get Ed Morse on here at some point. He's the one that made the major call. And no, we're not going to 120 a barrel. But, you know, Francisco Blanch with us there the other day with Bank of America. That was great. We settled in with Robert Teeter this morning in the heart of earnings season. A general question. You and I remember the romance where you'd have a coffee, a Sanka, whatever, and you'd open the second section of the Wall Street Journal, and on the back was revenues, net income, and I think they had share count. And some of us had a magnifying glass, and that was earnings season. And then maybe you tripped over the value line to look at one or two stocks. Is there any benefit to the earnings season frenzy that we inflict upon our listeners and viewers now?
Well, I think one of the great things is being able to accumulate and sort through that data a lot more quickly today. So I like to look at it in aggregate, not get too hung up on any individual company, whether they beat or missed by a penny, but look for the bigger trends. And so the trends that we've been following very closely have been that analysts continue to underestimate profit margins. So if you look at sales forecasts,
we saw that
companies
with Google
are coming
yesterday.
in. Yes, exactly. And I think that's the power going forward. You know, we have a market here that's reasonably expensive. Revenues are growing, but modestly with the economy cooling a little bit. But companies are really continuing to deliver on profit margin. There's been a lot of innovation there. I love digging through the transcripts and reading all the references to changes that companies are making, focus on process, focus on squeezing out costs, focus on improving profit margins. And it's an exciting time for that. So I do think earnings season this quarter has been particularly telling in that regard.
What are some of the sectors that are kind of standing out for you these days? I know in the past you've talked about technology, healthcare. Where do you see the opportunities these days?
So I really like companies and industries where they can control their own destiny. So with not a lot of top line growth, those profit margins are critical. You see that in technology. There's certainly the ability to control costs there. Those companies have also had great organic revenue growth, but the ability to control profit margins have been paramount there. In healthcare, I think the opportunity is more in the future, which is that there's an opportunity to squeeze costs there as well and improve profit margins. It hasn't come through in a big way yet, but I do think there's opportunity there. And then lastly, return of capital through dividends and buybacks is still a great place to be. Again, with a slower economy, you want companies that can control their own destiny on the earnings front.
How about we got this election coming up, so they tell me, next Tuesday. Do you care? Does that factor into how you think about it, or you just trade right through it?
Well, we've been encouraging people to really look through it because we think the earnings story is more powerful. You know, historically, that has been the case, regardless of the party in power. Earnings matter a lot more than the presidency or control of Congress. It's certainly important. Everyone's focused on it. It is creating some volatility. I found it interesting that, you know, the prior election had a higher vol structure, a higher VIX structure going into the election. Hopefully, we just sort of slide through this one, get a decision from a corporate standpoint. You know, knowing the results and being able to plan for the future is what really matters. So getting past the election, looking out to next year's earnings and economy is what's important.
With Caterpillar out today with the CFA Institute program, John Deere and Caterpillar are front and center for learning analysis of earnings, particularly with level one. They go into equipment leasing and all that stuff that I've flunked 3 times. And the answer is it's about free cash flow. What is the distinction between a good free cash flow growth in a bad or fictitious or contrived free cash flow growth?
Yeah, well, that's where it's important to go through, you know, every line on the income statement, go through all the characteristics that the companies talk about and see what's going on. So one thing I like to look at, particularly given the effects of inflation during the pandemic, has been on the revenue side and just seeing whether that revenue growth has been unit growth or pricing growth.
Dynamic. This is critical, and we saw it with Coca-Cola the other day. The entire game at Coke is price increase. Sweeney lives this every day.
Yes, and you're seeing it in, you know, I'm mentioning Shake Shack or other fast food companies earlier, seeing the return of these lower price baskets. So with inflation coming down a bit, it's not so much going to be on the revenue side. It'll be true unit growth, true organic growth. And then on the cost side as well, seeing whether those changes are sustainable or whether they're one time, what those indicate in terms of trends going forward, or companies really improving process.
Paul, I'm going through Google yesterday.
Yep.
And there it is, buried 8 paragraphs down. Their employee headcount went down as they grew, say, YouTube by 12%. How do you do that?
I don't know.
They're doing it.
Yeah, it used to be they were just hiring like crazy across technology. I'm looking at it just to show you that earnings matter. Eli Lilly, this is an $850 billion market cap company. Stock's down 8.6% pre-market trading. They missed some numbers here. So earnings do matter here. Talk to us about valuation, Robert. How do you think about valuation of the market? Do you strip out the Magnificent Seven to kind of get a better look of how the market's trading? How do you think about it?
Yeah, so we look at it with and without. We look at it across broader market segments. Valuation's clearly elevated. So no matter what metrics you use or what portion of the market, it's in the upper deciles in terms of valuation. But looking ahead, we base it on, you know, what's going to happen with inflation and interest rates.
Right.
Both of those are headed lower. You know, it's just a question of when. I think it's moving very slowly. Fed policy's moving slowly, but they're headed lower, and I think that helps support valuations here.
Pre-earnings place, is it a place to acquire shares of Microsoft?
Well, I can't comment on individual companies due to compliance and other things, but I do think companies like Microsoft that have organic revenue growth and that ability to control profit margin are great places to be.
Robert Teeter, thank you so much. I mean, it's just as simple as that.
Yep.
My basic idea here is at any given time, 70% underperform and 30% of stocks. It's like your batting average.
Exactly.
You know, Judge got a
3 out of
hit
10,
last
you're in
night.
Cooperstown.
Judge lifted the batting average last night.
Right, I know.
You know, I
The
mean,
kid from Jersey hit a grand slam.
and
How
he
about that?
walked.
Yeah.
That was very exciting.
That was Del Barton High
Yeah.
School, the Pride.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Very good. Yeah, a font of wisdom. Speaking of which, with our news in New York City, here's Michael Barr.
Thank you very much, Tom, Paul, John. Vice President Harris has delivered her closing argument in the campaign for the White House. She spoke in front of a crowd of more than 75,000 people on the National Mall, drawing contrast between herself and former President Trump.
He is the person who stood at this very spot nearly 4 years ago and sent an armed mob to the United States Capitol.
Meanwhile, Trump was holding a rally in Allentown, Pennsylvania. He criticized Harris's handling of the southern border and the U.S. economy.
Are you better off now than you were 4 years ago?
And Trump seized on a remark by President Joe Biden during a video call with Latino voters. It comes after backlash from Sunday's Trump rally at Madison Square Garden when a comedian called Puerto Rico an island of garbage. President Joe Biden during a video call with Latino voters on Voto Latino.
The only garbage I see floating out there is his supporters. His demonization of Latinos is unconscionable, and it's un-American.
Trump said Joe Biden and Kamala Harris don't just hate him, they despise the tens of millions of Americans who support him. Biden later clarifying posting his demonization of Latinos is unconscionable, what Trump did. At least 52 people have been killed by flash flooding in Spain. In the Valencia region, a month's worth of rain fell in an hour. Footage appears to show some people trapped by the floodwaters and climbing into trees to avoid being swept away. A Chinese spaceship carrying a 3-person crew is docked with the orbiting space station. The country seeks to expand its exploration in outer space. The New York Yankees avoided a World Series sweep with an 11-4 win over the Los Angeles Dodgers. It forced a Game 5 tonight in the Bronx. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with the Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr. This is Bloomberg. Tom, Paul, John.
So there it was last night. I'm watching the ball game. I'm trying to explain why the Dodgers bat first and the Yankees bat last of the ninth and all that. And I hear he is making the catch. Why do they hate him? And it was Mookie Betts making the catch as well. I've never seen that.
I've never seen that either.
Damn ball out of the glove.
Never mind taking the ball. Just take the whole glove. I've never seen that.
That was an assault.
What's the Bronx?
Seriously,
gotta be tough up there.
You sprain his wrist or
We'll see if
whatever.
the Bronx
it's
DA has something to say about that.
Now, what happens to the two fans? This is identified. This is out there. The New York Times has it. Austin Capobianco, 38 of Connecticut.
Okay.
So they ban him for life.
No, I think they're
Then
season
how do
ticket
they
holders. They'll be
police
back in
that?
the stands tonight. I think they'll be back in the stands tonight. They're season
No,
ticket holders.
they were ejected. They're not coming back.
I think they're coming back.
They didn't even get the ball.
They didn't get who got the ball? I guess they just,
The
they
dirt.
Just gave it, the dirt got the ball.
The dirt got the ball. Yeah.
That's great. I'm sorry. It's great to see it extend, Paul. The network's got to be happy.
Oh, it's great. I mean, they just want more games. That's all they want. They want more games.
A-Rod's throwing out the eighth game first pitch, he said.
Okay.
We're waiting for that. Running green on the screen right on NASDAQ up 47 points. We're on YouTube. Subscribe at Bloomberg Podcasts on YouTube.
markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
And I'm John Tucker in the Bloomberg Newsroom with this Bloomberg Business Flash. Eli Lilly shares, they're sinking in the pre-market trading. They reported sales for the blockbuster weight loss drug that fell short of expectations. The company also giving revenue guidance for the year that missed the average analyst estimate. And then you have Alphabet shares among the most active this morning. Google's parent up over 6% after its earnings report after the close of regular trading yesterday. The AI spending looks like it's paying off, among other things. Up next for the Mag 7 cohort, Microsoft and Meta platforms. They report after the close of regular trading today. A bunch of data readings out today. They include GDP, ADP employment, as well as pending home sales. Dow futures down to 89. S&P futures up 7. NASDAQ futures up 49. Citigroup strategists recommend selling any rally in U.S. stocks if next week's election results in a Republican sweep. They view such a scenario as leading to uncertainty for corporate earnings, so they say. And we check the markets for you all day long right here on Bloomberg Radio. I'm John Tucker, and that is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Paul and Tom.
Thanks so much, John. Greatly appreciate it. One of my themes, for those of you that listen every day here, and thank you for listening on your commute, Apple CarPlay, Android Auto, and of course the Quarter, 99.1 FM. Did you watch the ellipse speech last night?
I did not.
It's like a zillion people. I had the honor of being on Constitutional Mall, on the mall, with Emily.
Okay.
When President Obama made his first inaugural speech.
Really?
It was a cold morning.
That was pretty cool. Okay.
Cold January
Very
morning. Cool. It was somewhat a redux of that, which you expect. Part of that's looking at history, and part of it is the banks, well, I guess they're trying to hide how much money they're making.
Oh, boy.
I'm looking at Google, pre-pandemic, $31 billion in free cash flow. We got a model here. Mandeep Singh's got a model of $76 billion. It's like a double plus coming out of the pandemic. Are they hiding how successful they are? Is the bottom line, we're going to see it with Microsoft today, Apple tomorrow. They really don't want Washington to know how big and how fast they're growing, do they?
Yeah, and they know how to turn on the dials when it comes to top line or free cash flow. And that's what they showed last night is
the margin build out versus employee headcount was an act of God.
Yeah, I mean, all the new, in fact, 25% of new code is written by AI. For a company of Google's scale to say 25% of new code is written by AI, that just goes to show how far ahead they are when it comes to deploying these technologies, and then what it means for the headcount going forward. I mean, these companies will not grow headcount at least in the next 2-3 years.
So we hear anecdotally, Paul and I are reading on the weekend. Paul's at the beach. He's got the Vespa. He's having the morning coffee. And we're reading that tech and software engineers are having trouble getting jobs. Can you say it's because of AI?
They will certainly be more efficient and there won't be as many jobs. At the same time, I think what he called out was everyone is more productive when it comes to writing code as a result of this. And yes, that translates into some jobs changing because of the dynamic that code can be completed by AI system.
I think code can do like newscasts. John,
Tucker's job's a threat.
Can AI do newscasts?
We tried that in the old building or some version of it, and it was just a disaster.
Mandeep, we talk about Alphabet. It's still the search business, and I think I'm looking at the stock. It's only up 20% year to date because I think some investors are concerned about that core search business and the threat from AI. What did you hear last night from the company about that issue?
I mean, for a business of a $200 billion run rate growing double digits, that just goes to show that that threat was just a narrative. It's really not translating into any ad dollars going away. And what they called out was the lengthening of engagement when it comes to search. Typically, with the traditional search, you would see the blue links, they'll show you an ad, you will go to the publisher website. Now people are engaging in a more complex way. That's what they said, that the time spent in searching, the complexity of queries is getting bigger, and that is what's helping their ad loads when it comes to the overall ad revenue.
Mandeep, we don't care. The only reason you're here is Paul and my and John Tucker's entire future is based on this bet on YouTube. We say good morning and we value everyone subscribing to Bloomberg Podcasts on YouTube. Michael Nathanson suggests YouTube swings to profit this year. Was there evidence there that John Tucker's making profit at YouTube?
Yes. In fact, along with the cloud acceleration from 29 to 35% this quarter, YouTube subscriptions grew 28%. Just think about it. It's a $15 billion plus run rate business. Just the subscriptions piece. I'm taking out the YouTube ads, which is another $40 billion. Subscriptions piece grew 28%. Now compare that to Netflix. I mean, it's growing mid-teens, 15%, higher run rate. But still, that just goes to show how much traction they have with YouTube. So clearly that's working.
All right, I was using Google search last night trying to figure out something. What is AI overviews? That's coming in. I don't know what that is. What is that?
So basically what they've changed is the search page will have a summary of, whatever query you have. The prompt can be any length. And they show you an overview of all the blue links that they are showing you underneath that. So they have basically combined generative AI along with their traditional search. And then that Gen AI overview is the generative AI.
But there's no way John Tucker's using generative AI. I can just tell you that right now. What do you think?
Maybe I am, and I don't know.
No, exactly. I
Thank
would
you.
concur with that. Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Microsoft today, it's off your remit, right? You're not following Microsoft TikTok,
I mean,
right?
if you're looking at cloud, you have to look at Microsoft and
So
Amazon.
what are you looking at here at 415?
The Azure growth, and the bogey is higher than what consensus numbers are, which is 31% growth for an $80 billion run rate business. I think the bogey is 34% because Alphabet, Google's cloud business grew 35% last night. So anything less than that would be perceived as somewhat of a share shift. And
So translate this back. He's talking
That's
Mandeep
whisper
Singh. I have
numbers
no
kind of
idea what he
stuff.
just
I
said.
don't know.
They need to get 35% growth in what part of Microsoft?
in their Azure cloud business.
Oh, Azure.
Azure.
Okay.
Yes. And that's a much, so think of Google Cloud as a $45 billion run rate business. The Azure Cloud is an $80 billion run rate business, and Amazon AWS is a $105 billion run rate
The
business.
regulators have no idea what's going on. There's no way to put this genie back in the bottle.
And that's the big risk when it comes to Alphabet. So Sundar Pichai last night did call out that risk of, the DOJ cases and what it could mean for the company, and that is the big risk for the company.
100 billion, 80 billion, I think you said 40 billion.
Yeah.
You add it up, and all this stuff we're talking about runs on electricity, I believe. I mean, we're directly linked in here at our world headquarters, folks, to Staten Island. When Mr. Bloomberg turns on the lights in the morning, Staten Island dims. I get it. Where's all the electrical generation for the $180, $220 billion of business you're talking about?
I mean, in fact, Google did mention last night they are investing in nuclear reactors for some of their
new ones or refurb like 3 Mile Island?
I mean, these are, and they're doing it in partnership, so it's not all Google, but clearly that's part of the CapEx. The $13 billion in CapEx they spent, some of it is going towards building new data centers and adding nuclear power.
And they need water to cool, so they're going to go between John Tucker's house and the restaurant, right, at the ferry? I mean, is that where the plant's going?
Yeah, right in my backyard.
Yeah.
Tom, the S&P 500 Utilities Index this year, that's up 25%.
Yeah,
utilities.
It's amazing.
Plus the dividends you get. I
and I feel we haven't covered that. Eric, can you make a note? We got to get a bunch of utility animals in here to talk about Mandeep's world. This is exciting. I mean, did you expect this 5 years ago, Mandeep?
We're talking about 1 gigawatt data center. I mean, just think about it. Right now, we're at 25, 50 megawatts, 1 gigawatt data center. Yes, I did not expect this coming that quickly. So, no.
A gigawatt.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's a lot.
1.21 gigawatts can power more than 10 million light bulbs. And they're all burned out in John Tucker's basement.
It can probably power the entire New York City, if you think about it,
A gigawatt.
Yeah.
A gigawatt.
It's like physics with Mandeep. It's great.
all coming out of Silicon Valley.
Is your arm okay? We get email coming in here. They're worried about it.
Getting back to
playing tennis. You going to be ready for Wimbledon? Are you going to be ready for Wimbledon?
I don't know.
We'll talk. We get some free time your way. I want to talk to you about. I had the honor of seeing Vijay Amritrov with Borg at his peak at Forest Hills, and I really want to get time to talk to you about that. Mandeep Singh there in the middle of earnings season. Tim Carroll, the afternoon. They'll have the earnings for you. Bloomberg Surveillance.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
And I'm John Tucker in the Bloomberg Newsroom. With this Bloomberg Business Flash, let's start with Eli Lilly. Those shares down pre-market right now over 8%, lowering its full-year guidance. Sales of its blockbuster weight loss drug fell short of expectations, with the company actually blamed on inventory issues. The drug maker, based in Indianapolis, now expects full-year sales of $45 to $46 billion, so they lower the top end of their earlier guidance. And then you have Alphabet, Google among the most active pre-market after the earnings report after the close of regular trading yesterday. The shares right now up over 7%. Caterpillar, sometimes seen as a bellwether, posting a third quarter profit that missed analysts' expectations. They see weakening demand in construction around the world. This is a Dow component, so it's weighing on Dow futures this morning. Gold hitting a fresh record early today. Traders weighing potential market disruption. Bitcoin seen as a Trump trade, hovering near an all-time high. Dow futures down 74. S&P E-mini futures 6 points higher than NASDAQ futures. They're up 45 points. And right now the yields, 2-year is down 2 basis points, 4.07%. The 10-year yield is down just about 4 basis points. That is at 421. And we check the markets for you all day long right here on Bloomberg Radio. I'm John Tucker, and that is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Paul and Tom.
John Tucker, thank you so much. Katie Lyons scheduled to be with us here in a bit on the election trench warfare. And it's out there. Saw Dave Wasserman over at the Cook Political Report yesterday, okay. Paul. And I don't have the article in front of me, but it was like, here are the 19 counties across the nation where at 9 o'clock at night with a beverage in your hand, you can figure out what the trend's going to be. Let's go the other way right now. And when I was in Rome recently, this was really front and center. The international view of America's fractured politics, whatever your belief. Lindsay Newman, working with Ian Bremmer over at G0 over at Eurasia Group. We're thrilled she could join us right now. Dr. Newman, the view from 60,000 feet. What does the first G7 meeting look like? I dare say Russia attends G8. What does the first G7 meeting look like for President Trump or President Harris?
Well, as you know, Tom, we're just a few days out from this election, and it has been a turbulent, tumultuous one. We've had Donald Trump, former President Trump, suggesting that should he win this election on Tuesday, which remains a dead heat in anyone's game, that he would immediately begin the process of bringing the parties together in the Ukraine-Russia conflict and seeing if he could bring a resolution to it. He says the U.S. is on the brink of World War III. Those are the stakes that, as he sees them, so we would have to expect a lively G7, G8, as you said. Should it be Trump? Harris, as you know, the big thread line, and I feel it too, is that it's a bit of an unknown. She has tried to associate herself with Biden administration successes, perceived successes. She has tried to distance herself from those areas where it may have fallen short. Of course, Trump is always talking about Afghanistan. Afghanistan is a key sticking point on U.S. foreign policy. But there's a lot of unknown there on what a Harris presidency would mean on foreign policy. And we have to expect it would look a lot like what we've seen before from the Democrats. So those allies in the G7 would be the important partners for the U.S.
Dr. Newman, are we going to know at 9 or 10 o'clock at night on November 5th who our president is? If not, how long do we have to wait?
It's a great question. I mean, 9 o'clock at night for me sitting here in London, absolutely not. 9 o'clock at night for you sitting over there. I think the answer is still no. This race is a toss-up at the national level. Trump has now erased Harris's lead that she's held essentially since building her case in the race in when she entered in July. We know that each one of these swing states is also a toss-up and have traded back and forth. So if anyone tells you they know where this race stands today, right, either back away and close the door or run towards them, perhaps. But what I would just say, there are a couple of signals we can be watching. There's the momentum, which I've already talked about. There's this anti-incumbency sentiment that has circled the world, right? We've all been saying, oh, this is the year of elections. A half of the world's population will be voting. Harris may very well get caught up in that because voters may want change. They're feeling their pocketbooks are lighter. And then the early voting signals that we're already seeing are interesting. 53 million have already voted. There is some indication that perhaps Democrats are ahead on that, have had more votes cast. And interestingly enough, women may have voted more so already than men. Democrats feel that gender gap is going to be critical for them. But I think the short answer out of my long is no, we're not going to know at 9 o'clock at night.
For Trump supporters, and frankly Harris supporters as well, there seems to be a primal scream to find a Harris foreign policy that is distinctive and different or nuanced from a Biden foreign policy. Is it out there? Does it exist, this distinction of a new change in foreign policy?
I think you're absolutely right that there is a desire for change in foreign policy. I think it is not out there yet. But one point that I always come back to is personnel. We are not going to have the same personnel around Harris should she win the presidency.
She won't rehire Blinken
on foreign policy. She is not going to. I think it's very unlikely that she'll rehire Blinken. I think Burns is a likely familiar face that we'll see again. But it's not going to be Jake Sullivan. It's not going to be Antony Blinken. It will be a new cast of characters, some who have had ties to, say, the Obama administration. But the personnel is personal, and I think it will shape foreign policy.
So how about down ballot voting? What do we know about that these days? Because, I mean, we need to be able to call Congress at some point next week. How is that looking?
Yeah, I mean, look, it's also been very close. I think the expectation there is that we're going to see some split in the two houses, and that is going to affect whoever holds the White House, and we know that. Last night Harris was talking at that very stunning event at the Ellipse. Brought 75,000 people out, got under Donald Trump's fingernails with all those people, but she was talking about national security and the way forward. But she's talking about immigration reform. How is she going to get immigration reform? No president has been able to get, say, massive immigration reform through the houses because of these divisions that we see both within the houses and across the houses.
Does foreign policy matter inside the voting booth, sitting at your kitchen table, writing in the ballot? Is there any evidence that foreign policy matters, or is it all domestic at the end of the day?
We've all seen, there's been a million articles that we've seen about how foreign policy never matters, how it does matter this time around. I promise you it matters this time around. Donald Trump this weekend, speaking at Madison Square Garden, said he opened with this question: are you better off today than you were 4 years ago? Tom, that is what matters to voters this election. The fact that he thinks that they might be on the brink of World War II, that's of interest. But we know the top issues here. The top issues for voters are the economy, inflation, immigration. If you call immigration foreign policy, then maybe you've got a slight asterisk there. But what matters to people is how they're feeling in their pocketbooks, in their checking accounts, when they look around their friends and family.
Are we now at a new normal, Lindsay, as to the electorate? Is it split 50-50? It's just now going forward, I mean, it seems like the lines are so drawn and so set that I'm not sure how that changes in, cycles going forward.
Yeah, it's a great point, Paul. I mean, I've been writing a lot about what I was calling radicalization, which is just this idea that American voters are moving towards the polls and not towards the center. We know that Democrats and Republicans don't share facts. We know that they don't have a lot of love lost between them. We are in a hyperpolarized moment. I think it's a generational hyperpolarized moment. Generations can be long, and it's distinctly possible that this is just where we are for the next couple of cycles, because we're not seeing a retrenchment back towards the center. We're not seeing a big pull in either parties towards the middle. That's just not the trend line.
And I was talking today to Roman, who's one of my great editorial advisors. Roman and I were going back and forth on the David Brooks essay that was out a week and a half ago, 10 days ago, on just what you're talking about, Dr. Newman, which is a polarization. And yet, like Reagan and Ford, Ron Reagan, to get elected, moved to the middle. In the next 6 days, I mean, the President Trump's got a method. Let's be honest. Vice President Harris, is there any tendency to move to the middle?
I think what Vice President Harris's campaign has tried to do is to leave it open to interpretation, that she wants you to see yourself in her candidacy. That's why we don't see her drilling down on policy, despite the efforts to probe, despite the interest in understanding, as you asked me earlier, what really is the there on foreign policy. And I think it's because she's going to craft it as she goes if she wins this election. I don't expect us to see more of the dots filled in, though, on policy, either domestic or foreign policy, in the days ahead from her side.
Don't be a stranger. Bring the Bremer guy along with you next time. Lindsay Newman with Eurasia Group and G0 Media from London this morning. Really informative there, whatever your politics. Red and green on the screen, a VIX under 20, 19.63. With our news in New York City, he would not taken the ball out of Mookie's glove, Michael Barr.
Thank you very much, Tom, Paul, John. Kamala Harris gave her closing argument at the Ellipse in the nation's capital last night, vowing to put country over party. The vice president telling voters that their ancestors sacrificed and suffered for the fundamental freedoms enjoyed by Americans today.
They didn't do that, only to see us submit to the will of another petty tyrant.
Meanwhile, during a campaign rally in Allentown, Pennsylvania, former President Donald Trump encouraged his supporters to get to the polls.
We must defeat Kamala Harris and stop her radical left agenda with a landslide that is too big to rig.
More than 51 million Americans have already voted. Spanish authorities say at least 52 people have died after flash floods swept away cars, turned village streets into rivers, and disrupted rail lines and highways. Emergency services in the eastern region of Valencia say floods of mud-colored water tumbled vehicles down streets at high speeds. Police and rescue services used helicopters to lift people from their homes and cars. The Yankees lived to see another game. New York avoided a World Series sweep with an 11-4 win over the Los Angeles Dodgers. Yankee star Aaron Judge.
It's all the same. Like I said, we're just focused on one game. Even when the series was 0-0, it's just about winning one game and kind of going from there. So just because our backs are against the wall, it really hasn't changed that mindset, especially with this group who's been through a lot. So we're just going to keep doing that.
Game 5 is tonight in the Bronx. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr. This is Bloomberg. Tom, Paul, John.
We're talking about utilities, gentlemen, about the electrical generation for Google, Microsoft, and the rest of it. Fortunately, we have physicists out on live chat.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Live chat on YouTube. Subscribe to Bloomberg Podcast out there so you can converse with a physicist, Logan. 1.21 gigawatts is also what it takes to jump back in time. You just need some Libyan plutonium, a flux capacitor, and a DeLorean that goes at least 88
miles per hour.
That movie was 40 years ago, 39 years ago. It feels like it came out like 3 years ago.
1985, the summer.
It's a great movie.
Doc, you invented a time machine?
Thank you, Logan, for bringing that back. 1.2 gigawatt. Remember they stole the plutonium.
Yep, in a parking lot, shopping mall parking lot.
Lined up here with huge news flow coming up. Just so you know, Paul and I cleared our schedules out way past the election. We're cleared it out. It's like into, Friday. Paul's given up a beach weekend. 80 degrees on Halloween.
I don't know what's going on out there, but we'll
Really?
take it. We'll take it. I remember some Halloweens being out there with my kids, and you got the snow coat on, the pant, just a
And
disaster.
it has been so dry that the deer are coming up on my front porch and eating the pumpkin for the moisture. So I've got
It's serious
pumpkins
stuff.
with
No, it's
giant
serious.
gnaw marks in them.
Can't you just put out a bowl of water for Bambi?
Well, we want them to
What are you
adapt
going
to
as
the
for
conditions.
Halloween?
An overworked, tired newsman.
Yes,
So
exactly.
I'm not changing.
I'm going as private credit. I
No
decided
comments for the peanut gallery,
Mrs.
please.
Keene is going as private equity. It's going to be a great,
Tomorrow night, there you go. Some good parties in New York City. This is where you want to be. Soho. Greenwich
John's
Village
story
for
yesterday
the
about
parade.
putting out his trick or treat is great. We don't even answer the door.
No, I've been there 30 years. I think I had one trick-or-treater in 30 years.
They know not to come to the old man
I'll
Tucker's
tell
house.
some stories here.
The kids were
From New York
now.
City, stay with us. Bloomberg Surveillance.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
And I'm John Tucker in the Bloomberg Newsroom with this Bloomberg Business Flash. Futures right now, they're mixed. Just getting headlines from AbbVie. They are boosting their fiscal year adjusted earnings per share forecast range. Earlier, we heard from Eli Lilly lowering its full year forecast after sales of its blockbuster weight loss drug fell short. They chalked that up to inventory issues. Obesity, one of the largest and fastest growing areas for the pharmaceutical industry. Caterpillar, we can call it a bellwether, posting a third quarter profit that missed expectations. The machinery producer grappling with weakening demand in construction around the world, they say. Actually, it's worth mentioning European results. We did get those. Look at Volkswagen, the operating profit plummeting 42%, and the operating margin just 3.6%. That's kind of an eye-opener. Meantime, the Chinese EV maker BYD, they are reporting this morning that they have beat Tesla on quarterly revenue for the first time as an EV company. The contract rate on a 30-year fixed mortgage, just got this from the Mortgage Bankers Association data, that rose 21 basis points to 6.73%. in the week ended October 25th. Dow futures right now down 67. S&P futures, they're up 3. The NASDAQ futures right now 29 points higher. And we check the markets for you all day long right here on Bloomberg Radio. I'm John Tucker. That's your Bloomberg Business Flash. Paul and Tom.
Thanks so much, John. Greatly appreciate that. Just quickly here on real estate, Paul. It's like we went up 7.5%, 8%, whatever mortgages went up to. That was harsh. Then things got better. Am I right that rolling into the end of the season before the holidays, that this could be harsher than the first move up?
Yeah, well, I'm looking at I look at the Mortgage Bankers Association 30-year fixed contract rate. It's now 6.73%. We had gotten down, just like a month and a half ago, maybe down to about 6.1%. People were talking about maybe getting sub 6%, which would free up the market. We've had interest rates come back up higher, Tom.
Bloomberg Surveillance this morning. We're brought to you by Interactive Brokers. Their portfolio analysts consolidate, analyze all your financial accounts on one powerful dashboard. Do it for free. Sign up for Portfolio Analyst at ibkr.com/free PA. Let me spell that out. FREEPA. ibkr.com/free PA. And we thank them for their support. We don't do this enough. We're doing it now. I don't care what the news flow is. Carol and Tim will have Microsoft for you and Meta. And Meta's this afternoon too, right?
Maybe, yeah.
It's like, it's Facebook.
I think so. Yeah, exactly.
It's fine.
Let's be honest.
Let's talk tax-free bonds. We're going to take advantage of tax-free bonds right now. Dan Close joins with Nuveen, who basically invented the business as well. Dan, what is the most efficacious way to buy tax-free income right now? Somebody with a small pot that wants to go forple tax-free, like Paul Sweeney. What's the best way to do it?
Efficacious. Wow, big polysyllabic words.
Yeah, we do that on Wednesday. We don't do that on Thursday. Continue.
Yeah, there's a whole bunch of different vehicles we have. We've got 40 Act funds. We've got ETFs. I think the biggest thing that we've started to develop is interval funds, where you could put in anytime you would like. Quarterly liquidity, given that munis have such a big retail audience and such a large amount of retail investors, sometimes that could be the best vehicle, but municipals, 40 Act funds, ETFs, we have a large separately managed account business. So any way that you're looking to get tax exempt income, we have a vehicle for it.
So Dan, talk to us about taxable municipal bonds, because that's a part of the municipal bond market a lot of people aren't aware of. They think municipal bonds, sure, triple tax free, but there are some taxable opportunities as well. Why? Talk to us about that business.
Yeah, I just got back from Japan 2 weeks ago, where we have, probably 50 different institutional accounts. I'm heading to Germany next week for that. So, we really grew our business, and I think we saw that business really pick up, after 2008, 2009, the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act put together Build America bonds, where effectively the Treasury pays 35% of the coupon for any issuer. And so this $4 trillion market has an 900 billion or so component that's taxable munis. And we've just seen, in our book at least, life insurance companies, different insurance companies, and especially in Japan, in Germany, in Switzerland, and Korea, we've just seen this big pickup. And it really started in, 2016, when there was this negative rate environment. Just bringing AA New York City water and sewer around the world has been a huge business. And, for us at least, we built about a $50 billion business by going around the world and selling, water and sewer bonds to different parts of the world.
Dan, what's the biggest mistake we make in buying individual municipal bonds? I mean, you guys codified the unit trust, say 10, 12, 14 bonds locked into a portfolio seem like an intelligent thing. But what's a rookie mistake right now for fossils trying to get forple tax-free income?
You're asking about the buying it yourself, and fully, you look at Fed data, 50% of this $4 trillion market is folks individually owning it. So I think the biggest mistake you make is not having tax harvesting. So, in our business, if you could go in 22, 23, sell your position at a loss, recognize that loss and rebook income. Because if you could go in and rebook income, you just want to maximize the amount of tax-exempt income for your total returns. And so if you do a buy and hold, which is a great strategy, but if you do a buy and hold, you don't sometimes recognize that tax loss in a higher rate environment, and you also don't get to rebook income. So, we've got a really big business, 50,000 accounts, 50 billion in separately managed accounts. And a large component of that is just going in and having that tax loss harvesting. And you can individualize it. We had an account come in who said, I just want blue state munis. And they defined what blue state was in their mind. And we built them a portfolio of just blue state. So you could customize it as well, too, if you are an individual holder and want to have professional management there.
Speaking of blue state, red state, we got an election coming up next week. Does a municipal bond have an opinion about who will win, who could win, what it means?
Yeah, for the muni market, we see broad support from both Democrats and Republicans, so we're not terribly concerned. I think the biggest thing on our mind right now is just tax policy. You've had it on your program before. Tax Cut and Jobs Act sunsets at the end of 2025. Absent congressional action, and a very, very good for munis, we're going to have a reset of tax brackets from a 37 to a 39.6%. Taxes going up makes the exemption worth that much more. So, in our minds, at least, if there is nothing done, which is probably the most likely path going forward, and you don't see a $4.5 trillion tax reform lift, taxes go up and the muni exemption is just worth that much more.
What does that do to the other markets? Do you have an opinion on what that does to equities?
I got to imagine with higher taxes, equities don't do as well as municipals. I mean, if you could go in, we've got, if you just look at right now the high yield muni market and just look at the index and you put on that on a tax equivalent basis, munis have really backed up this year. I mean, we've backed up 75 basis points in the 10-year space, where 10-year treasuries have only backed up, 25, 30 basis points. So just by clipping a high yield bond right now, you're making 9.25%, 9.5%. So I would think that with higher taxes, that just goes to a higher tax equivalent yield. I'm not an equity expert by any stretch, but I would imagine those higher taxes make it less favorable to invest in.
On Bloomberg Surveillance, Dan, everyone's an equity expert. Dan Close, thank you so much. Head of Municipals at Nuveen. I learned a lot there.
Yeah, absolutely.
I guess you go out and what's the minimum money you need to start a muni bond portfolio?
Nothing. I mean, you can go in there and just, I just have a laddered approach to munis. I just kind of own them all throughout, 1 year through 30 years, and as they roll off, you just kind of refill.
So, like, if I walk in with the Austrian 97 year I have,
exactly. We'll take care of you.
They're not going to look at that.
Yeah,
you know what we're doing? We're featuring some Puerto Rican music today and about it. And some of it started with somebody from Colombia, which was Shakira. You're not to say that she started the whole get-go. I mean, you can take it back to West Side Story and even before that. But Shakira's the one that said, I'm on tour, let's do some Puerto Rican music. And so we start La Tortura. I mean, Shakira here, getting it going 15 years ago. We hope you're getting going, too, on a beautiful Wednesday across America. Yankees, Dodgers tonight.
This is Bloomberg Surveillance with Tom Keene and Paul Sweeney.
Apple's still minting more money than God, right?
Geopolitics front and center for global Wall Street.
With Lisa Mateo on markets.
Stocks are coming off another record high.
And Michael Barr with news.
U.S. Secretary of State discussed the conflict in Gaza.
The best in economics, finance, investment, and international relations. This is Bloomberg Surveillance on Bloomberg Radio.
Good morning, everyone. Paul Sweeney, Tom Keene, Michael Barr, Lisa Mateo. Ms. Mateo on assignment. John Tucker in for her today. Really an extraordinary week here, wrapped around earnings in the middle of the week here. Microsoft this afternoon, front and center, Paul.
That's one of the favorite names from a lot of the leading tech voices we talk to, Tom, like Dan Ives. Likes the cloud play there at Microsoft, and Satya Nadella has just done an extraordinary job at that company.
Summary from Google, we heard from Mandeep Singh, was margin improvement around robust on-plan revenues, maybe a little bit above plan, and headcount under. The idea of tech companies being efficient or cutting expenses, it's still not in my brain.
Well, Meta stock is up, over 70% this year, in large part because they focused on cutting costs. We know the top line story is there, so they've been cutting costs and driving profitability, and I think the market likes that.
Is it symbol Meta or is it Facebook, FBC? It's Meta.
Know. Yeah.
They're out today.
They
Aftermarket.
Ticker symbol.
Yeah,
After we spent so much time thinking about that Facebook ticker symbol.
We'll have to see there as well. We'll get more on Mark Elliott Zuckerberg's shop through the morning as well. Dennis Gartman coming up on gold. Nick Colas will be with us on a broader view, and we start strong in this hour with Megan Horniman. We're out on YouTube. Subscribe to Bloomberg Podcasts. On your commute, we say good morning across the nation, particularly Sirius XM, Channel 121, and of course, Apple CarPlay, Android Auto. The quarter, good morning, 92.9 Boston. I'm trying to root for the Yankees. Failing like every third at
Last night was a good night. We'll take that.
You're doing all right.
It's a struggle for those of us of the Red Sox nation. Struggle to say. I mean, Mookie's there, and you don't want Mookie hurt. I mean, if you're a Red Sox fan,
Mookie's having a great series.
It's a struggle to say the least. We'll have to see on all of this as well. But we say good morning, Paul Sweeney and Tom Keene. We say good morning to Cone Resnick, of course. Cone Resnick Advisory Assurance Tax. Discover game-changing strategies to maximize value, optimize performance, and manage risk. Put your business at the forefront. From the Interactive Broker Studios, our Bloomberg Business Flash, John Tucker.
All right, Tom and Paul Meta at Microsoft in the batter's box next to the Mag 7 cohort out after the close yesterday. Alphabet beat that sent the NASDAQ composite to a record. Alphabet shares up pre-market 6.6%. Advanced Micro Devices sinking after lackluster revenue forecast. Eli Lilly tumbling 10% pre-market after sales of its blockbuster weight loss drug fell short of expectations. Corvo, you know them because their biggest customer is Apple, tumbling this morning, forecasting revenue and profit far short of estimates. Just about a week away from the Fed decision, investors turning their focus to some high-profile reports. Friday, of course, the jobs report, and in 15 minutes, ADP employment. Then this morning, we'll get GDP and pending home sales. Dow futures right now, 75 points lower. S&P futures unchanged. NASDAQ futures up 13. And we check the markets for you all day long right here on Bloomberg Radio. I'm John Tucker. That's your Bloomberg Business Flash Bulletin, Tom.
John Tucker, thanks so much. Joining us now, an important conversation, Megan Horniman, Chief Investment Officer for Verdance Capital. Megan, within a cautious view, and we see that, for example, with Eli Lilly this morning down bigly. But within that, Megan, there are winners in the market and losers in the market. If you have a Megan Horniman cautious view, not so much how do you handle the losers, which is avoid them, but what do you do with stocks that you're enthusiastic about?
I mean, right now, I think the area that we would focus on, I understand that technology's got a big week this week from an earnings perspective, and we've seen what happened, overnight with the earnings that we got yesterday. And tech could get a boost here from earnings. They typically do. But when you look at valuations from the technology and especially the growth side, this side of the market still looks expensive to us, given the fact that we don't think the Fed can be as aggressive as the market's pricing in. And even looking at the bond market, where you're looking at yields rising. So I think, avoiding that large cap growth area and focusing more on value. Value still is, over the long run, lagging that large cap growth area. So that's a part of the market that we would prefer to be in at this time.
So Megan, if we're looking for value, where do you guys see value these days?
Well, we're cautious about the economy going into 2025, and that's reflecting in our portfolio allocation. We aren't significantly overweight U.S. stocks. We actually recently added some to the developed international markets, and that's because not necessarily their economies are so much better than ours, or they're in a better fiscal situation. It's primarily the fact that their valuations are reflecting those downside risks, and that's something that we don't see here in the U.S. So over the long run, we think that you can get some value in the developed international markets.
So, Megan, how about on fixed income side here? I mean, again, an investor can sit in a U.S. two-year Treasury and get 4.1%. Is that the play, or are you suggesting folks take some credit risk here?
No, I wouldn't take credit risk. I think you can take a little bit of maturity. You can go out maybe to the intermediate part of the curve, but I don't think from a credit perspective, whether you're looking at investment grade bonds or you're looking at high yield bonds, I know they've been very resilient over the past year, but their spreads, again, similar to the large cap equity space, the spreads aren't giving you that reward for that extra risk going into an environment where we think the economy will be slowing.
Megan, give us out and you did this at Deutsche Bank so well, give us out a 3-year, 5-year, dare I say a 10-year view, given the debt and deficit overlay of the world. I mean, you in your research note, you fold into the recent IMF love fest where they're looking for a reduced growth in that. But the debt deficit overlay, it's on everybody's mind, but no one's talking about it. Talk about it.
Exactly, and I agree completely. This is what keeps us up at night. In the IMF report, they're expecting $100 trillion of global debt, public debt, by the end of this year. That's about 90% of global GDP. This is unsustainable. This is a path, and especially here in the U.S., that frightens us. It's just not sustainable. It needs to be addressed, and it's not being talked about enough, not on the campaign trail.
Right.
This is a concern that eventually we can't keep kicking this down the road.
Yeah, but the folks, to put this in perspective, Joe Stiglitz, Nobel laureate at Columbia, and Donald Trump, candidate, are on the same page. The way you solve the debt and the deficit, the only way to solve it's a little g, which is the growth rate of America. Megan, do you suggest we're not going to be able to sustain the little g to pay for all this debt and deficit and interest expense?
It's going to have to be a lot bigger than a little g in order to do this over the long run. And I think a lot are banking on just the evolution of AI and what that can do from an economic standpoint. And we do. We believe in that as well. AI is going to help economic growth for the long run. But at this point, we have to address what's happening with our net interest costs. That's putting a big burden on what we can do from a spending perspective. And if we were to enter over the next 3 to 5 years a significant downturn, it's not necessarily our forecast, but if there's a significant downturn, a hard landing that no one's talking about, where is that flexibility from the Fed perspective? Right. Where is the flexibility from the government perspective to come in and save the day? I don't see it. And so this needs to be something addressed.
Yeah, but Megan, off your remit, but I'm going to ask you this because you've been around the block 10 times. And the answer is, if you say AI to the rescue, what does AI do to the part of America that Mr. Trump has found a fantastic resonance with? AI is not going to come to the rescue of Eastern Kentucky, is it?
Well, it depends on where they're going to build all these data centers. Remember, the one thing, AI is fantastic, but the one thing we're lacking from AI is the infrastructure. And where is the infrastructure going to be built? Is it going to be built in that Sunbelt area? Are we going to, do it there? I don't know, to be honest with you, but we do need that energy infrastructure. We simply don't produce enough energy at this point to support the growth in AI.
Megan, our Federal Reserve started with a pretty big statement with a 50 basis point rate cut. Where do they go from here? Because the economic data has been pretty solid.
Yeah, I think the bond market's telling them to slow down. You can see that from the rise we've seen in interest rates since they've cut in the middle of September. You've seen basically 60 basis points in the 10-year treasuries, something along those lines. So the bond market's saying, whoa, 50 basis points may have been too aggressive. You need to maybe sit back and assess what's going on from an economic standpoint, because since then, we've seen the economic data coming in better inspected. Look at the consumer confidence report yesterday. This was something that we were concerned about, that the Fed would do something aggressive, that consumers would get really optimistic that rates were going to go back down and then start spending again. And guess what you have there? You have the inflation cycle coming back. That was a concern that we had. So I think they still have room to cut, but I think they have to be very careful. 50 basis points is off the table, and I don't see the rate cuts that the market's pricing in next year.
Megan Horniman, thank you for the brief. Greatly appreciated. 10-year real yield 2% yesterday, even 2.01. Right now clocking in a little bit less angst there, 1.91%. With our news in New York City, Michael Bauer.
Thank you very much, Tom, Paul, John. With 6 days left until Election Day, both Kamala Harris and Donald Trump are pointing the finger at each other as the bigger danger this November. Bloomberg's Kaylee Lyons has more from Washington.
Certainly, we saw that from Kamala Harris in her speech on the Ellipse in Washington last night. Of course, the very same spot at which Donald Trump spoke to supporters on January 6, 2021, before they stormed the Capitol. And she did try to draw this contrast between herself and Trump, referring to Trump as unstable, obsessed with revenge, consumed with grievance, and out for unchecked power, trying to make it very much about the threat to democracy, though she did try to broaden her message beyond that to more positive tones and visions for the future, talked about her economic policy, and hit on the border as well.
Bloomberg's Kaylee Lyons reports Trump is seizing on the border issues as well. He is now promising to set up a fund backed by seized gang and drug cartel assets to support victims of migrant crime in an 11th-hour pitch to swing state voters. At a rally in Allentown, Pennsylvania last night, Trump continues to face backlash over anti-immigrant comments at Madison Square Garden last weekend. President Biden seized on the joke that Puerto Rico is a floating island of garbage on a call with Latino voters last night.
The only garbage I see floating out there is his supporters. His demonization of Latinos is unconscionable, and it's un-American.
Former President Trump jumped on that.
Remember Hillary? She said deplorable. And then she said irredeemable, right? But she said deplorable. That didn't work out. Garbage, I think, is worse, right? But he doesn't know. You have to please forgive him. Please forgive him, for he not knoweth what he said.
Later, President Biden posted on X that he meant to say Trump's supporters' rhetoric was garbage. The Yankees survived. New York avoided a World Series sweep with an 11-4 win over the Dodgers. Game 5 tonight in the Bronx. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr, and this is Bloomberg. Tom, Paul, John.
Everybody's missing the punchline tonight. I just looked it up. I assumed this, but there it is official. Cole Flaherty, a redux for Game 5, right?
Yeah. Yeah, the Dodgers threw out the bullpen last night, so now they're ready to go back to the rotation.
Is there an advantage to the teams that they've seen the pitcher before, 4 days before? And the answer's got to be.
Oh, yeah. And the first time you get a new pitcher and you don't know whatever a phenom could do with this, you don't know what's coming.
You just don't know.
And now as you see them, I can seize you up.
It's going to be a different game.
Oh,
but what will be the same is Flaherty's going to have a black Rawlings glove with orange Detroit Tigers thread on it. Everything's blue, and the choreographer for Fox is going, who let him have an orange glove? I mean, it's just, can't they buy him a Dodgers glove?
Well, I might steal that one from the stands.
Yeah, Flaherty, Cole tonight. This is fun. In the Bronx, this is fun. Stay with us on YouTube from New York City, Bloomberg Surveillance.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
And I'm John Tucker in the Bloomberg Newsroom with this Bloomberg Business Flash. We have breaking news from Route 280 in Roseland, New Jersey. That would be home to ADP. Private sector employment, according to ADP, increasing by 233,000 jobs in October. They also say annual pay was up 4.6%, according to their private payroll report. Of course, Friday, we're going to get the all-important jobs report. A rally by technology stocks propelling the NASDAQ to a record yesterday. Google parent Alphabet showing an expensive foray into AI. Starting to pay off, they delivered better than expected sales for their cloud computing business, driving more usage of its flagship search engine. The shares this morning, they were rallying. Advanced Micro Devices, those shares sliding after the chipmaker revenue. The outlook fell below expectations. And then you have Eli Lilly. That is sinking. The company lowering its full-year guidance. Sales of the blockbuster weight loss drug falling short of expectations. They're blaming inventory for that. Chipotle dropping after reporting third-quarter sales that fell just short of Wall Street expectations. Right now, we have the Dow futures down 77, S&P E-mini futures unchanged. The NASDAQ futures 18 points higher. And we check the markets for you all day long right here on Bloomberg Radio. I'm John Tucker, and that's your Bloomberg Business Flash. Paul and Tom.
And John Tucker, thank you so much. I mean, lots going on here this morning, folks. We're going to digress right now on something that Paul and I noticed this morning, up $6. Gold, $27.86 per ounce. I mean, where were you? Why didn't you know?
I know. Where was I on
you
gold?
got Krugerrands in the bedroom cupboard or all that.
Yep.
Joining us now with one of the trades of the decade, there's no other way to put it, Dennis Gartman. Long ago and far away, he said, okay, it's not going to be like the early 1980s, but get on board gold. But if you're going to do it, do gold in euro, and particularly do gold in yen. There's a whole new leg up here of gold strength is measured in Japanese yen. Dennis Gartman joins us this morning. Dennis, last time you were on, you said this rally will extend. Will extend because of central bank buying and gold goes up, or will it extend because of yen weakness?
It'll extend because of central bank buying, primarily because of geopolitical circumstances that prevail and are getting worse around the world. That's the driving motive force right now. And the fact that the Japanese yen has been as weak as it has been, gold in yen terms has gone up 50% for the year to date, which is really quite impressive. Gold in euro terms is up about 31%, and gold in dollar terms is up 28%. So owning gold has been a demonstrative winner. Been very fortunate. I've been very consistent with this. There are times when one is to be long of gold. There are times when one is to be short of gold, and there are times when one is to be neutral of gold. But the time for the past 2 years and continuing forward shall be to be long of the gold market.
I mean, Paul, 2 years is a Gartman perspective. I'm going to go back 24 years, turn of the century. You've clocked 11% per year gold in yen, coming off of 07, 08, 09. Dennis was there for that. You're clocking 10% per year. The linearity of gold in yen, it's frightening how successful, how persistent this has been.
It is, absolutely. Dennis, on the margin, who's been buying gold?
Central banks have been buying gold, and the public has begun to be a buyer of gold. But the driving motive force have been the continued purchases by the central banks, primarily the People's Bank of China, has been a driving force. The Central Bank of Russia has been a driving force. The only bank that hasn't been a driving force has been our bank. But on balance, the central banks and particularly from the BRICS nations have been substantive buyers, and I think they're going to be consistently buying gold over the course of the next several years. It's been a well-entrenched trade. They've done the right thing. They've been correct. And my old rule is do more of that which is working and less of that which is not. That's been working. Let's do more of it.
Where's the horse in the cart here, Dennis? I mean, when you look at North Carolina State football, and there's a horse in a cart. And the horse is, it's been an okay season, but in 2 weeks they play Duke, so that's all that matters. I mean, I get it. But Dennis Gartman, where's the horse and cart on gold with inflation? Do I need inflation up for gold to continue up? or is gold going up a precursor to a higher inflation?
I think gold is a precursor to a higher inflation, but you clearly need to have inflationary pressures above 2 and 3% to keep gold moving at the angle that it has been moving from the lower left to the upper right. But again, gold is driven by two motive forces: inflation and geopolitical circumstances. And right now, I think geopolitical circumstances are the driving motive force. Plus the fact, it was a little bit disconcerting to me that the BRICS nations met last week and didn't announce a substantive change in their dollar policies and a substantive change in the purchase of gold. That was a bit disappointing, but gold has held very well despite that disappointment. Always buy things that go up when the news has been relatively disappointing.
Dennis, we have Bitcoin, which Tom follows closely. It's $72,000 per token. What's the correlation in your mind, if any, gold and Bitcoin?
I've been wrong about Bitcoin. I've been basically opposed to. I shouldn't say opposed to it. Just been relatively non-committed to it, and I've been wrong. Clearly, that's been the place to be. It's been driven by the same circumstances that drive gold prices higher: inflation and geopolitical circumstances. So the two have been tending to move in tandem, one with the other, and I continue to think that that's going to happen. If there weren't for Bitcoin, however, clearly it has taken some of the marginal buyer of gold has gone to the Bitcoin market. If there weren't for Bitcoin, gold would be demonstrably stronger than it is right now.
Interesting. We've got a Federal Reserve that's cutting rates, yet we've got yields moving higher. We've got the 10-year Treasury at 4.26%. What do you make of that move in the bond market here?
For the first time in several months, I've actually found myself wanting to be a buyer of the short end and the long end of the yield curve. You had a very good 7-year auction yesterday, the smallest amount taken by the street in probably 2 years. That I found impressive. So I think you're going to get a slight rally, maybe a good bounce in the bond market, but it won't last very long.
Dennis, down where you live, there's a lot of fat cats. They retired. They want to live near Dennis Gartman, get in 18 holes with you as you can. And the answer is they all did it on Mag 7. Now, I know it's not Nifty 50, X-Rocks and the rest of it from years ago, but Dennis Gartman on, excuse me, Dennis, what to do if you own Microsoft or Meta. Do you add to it? Do you hold it? Do you go hide under a rock? What do you do?
I think you hide under a rock. You've been very fortunate. You've been very right. And it's been an amazing trade. Clearly, I have missed it. I grew up under the Nifty 50, and I've looked at the Mag 7 and think there's too many correlations between that and the Nifty 50.
Right.
And the fact that price to earnings multiples have expanded as dramatically as they have. So I've missed it. But if you've been lucky enough to be a buyer, probably the best thing for you to do is turn your quote machine off and sit tight.
Yeah. Dennis, quickly here, you're affiliated with the University of Akron Endowment. We're getting Ivy League endowments in. They're heavily weighted to alternative investments. Can alternative investments and institutional portfolios act as a substitute for good old SPX stocks?
No, probably not. Actually, we've been very fortunate. I'm now the emeritus chairman of the University of Akron's endowment. And as chairman, I kept us away from alternatives on balance. The only big thing that we did, contrary to everybody else, was bought a good position in gold. But sticking to the old line, owning equities in the long run has probably been the best course of action. We've actually outperformed most of the Ivy Leagues this year. We've been very fortunate. We've kept things simple, owned stocks, reduced our exposure to the bond market on balance, and bought a bit of gold. And we've avoided Bitcoin at the same time. So we've been very fortunate, we've been very lucky, and we've
avoided Bitcoin. Dennis, Dennis, we're out of time. You told me to load the boat on Bitcoin at 29,000. We're clocking 72,000 right now on BitDog. Gartman and Keene down in flames, not owning Bitcoin, unlike Paul Sweeney. Dennis, this has been too long. Thank you so much. Congratulations on the call of the decade on gold in yen. I mean, there it is. Gartman, well, we avoided Bitcoin. That's a badge of honor?
I don't know. He says he missed it, but he's got a lot more right than he's missed, that's for sure, in his career. Interesting to say this. Red and green on the screen right now. John Tucker mentioning ADP out with some buoyant jobs numbers. On Friday at 8:30, we go beneath the headline data, the jobs report. We're on YouTube. Subscribe to Bloomberg Podcast. Good morning, Bloomberg Surveillance.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
And I'm John Tucker in the Bloomberg Newsroom with this Bloomberg Business Flash. Just waiting for the latest data, GDP. Meantime, ADP, companies adding 233,000 jobs in October. That's the most in more than a year, according to the private payroll provider, ADP. This comes, of course, before the government's report out on Friday. GDP annualized quarter over quarter, 2.8% reading. Last month it was it was 3% and 2.8% lighter than estimates, according to economists surveyed by Bloomberg. Again, GDP 2.8%. Tech did help send the NASDAQ Composite Index to a record close yesterday. Earnings results for Microsoft and Meta Platforms coming up later today. Google parent Alphabet delivering an earnings beat. Those shares pre-market up about 6.5%. And then you had Eli Lilly lowering its full-year guidance due to disappointing sales of its weight loss drugs, causing its shares to fall just about 10%. The company's sales of Zepbound and Mounjaro missing analyst expectations. Right now, the Dow futures down to 87, S&P futures down a point, the NASDAQ futures up 6. The two-year yield, which is more policy reactive, up right now 5 basis points. We're up to 4.14. The 10-year up 1 basis point. That is at 4.26. And we check the markets for you all day long right here on Bloomberg Radio. I'm John Tucker, and that is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Paul and Tom.
John Tucker, thanks so much. A little bit of green and screen NASDAQ waiting for Meta, Microsoft this afternoon. This is a joy. Nick Colas joins us right now. Thrilled that he could be with us. First of all, let me tell you about the jobs report coming up on Friday. It's at 8:30, and that means here at 8:30 on our economic indicators. They're brought to you by Commonwealth. Join over 2,000 independent financial advisors. They're taking control of their growth with advisor-centric support. Future-ready technologies. Grow on your own terms with a partner dedicated to your success. Go to commonwealth.com to learn how. We got to cover up something first. I mean, people go away to school, and they're like, it's good when there's other schools around. So if you go to Haverford like you did, and you're studying absolutely bizarre majors like Nick Colas did, you end up, you're walking the 2 miles, Turnbridge Road to College Avenue to Haverford Road. You're going north, deep north to Bryn Mawr to study. Nice. Did you do most of your studying at Bryn Mawr?
Yes, that was where I majored.
Seven Sister School.
They had the best archaeology undergrad program in the country when I was applying to schools, and so I studied with the very best people in the field for 4 years. It was awesome.
All women there.
It is all women there. Yes, Haverford had gone co-ed.
Okay.
3 years before I got there, I saw the last all-male class graduate.
Okay.
And then Bryn Mawr was single-sex, obviously. And so it was an interesting dynamic.
I see what you did there. Okay.
I mean, it's a plethora of people here. Jody Lurie, Bryn Mawr. Greifeld shows up, sometimes without the horse.
Yep.
But this is a Philadelphia thing. Do you have any perspective on the Pennsylvania vote coming up? The axis of Philadelphia out to Pittsburgh, having been a mainline academic?
Mainline is sort of like Manhattan. It is its own little isolated world, so no.
Do you think it's definitive within the election? I don't hear a lot of people talking about it.
No.
Okay. Let's go to your research note. Nick Colas, of course, we protect the copyright of all our guests. Get it from Nick Colas at DataTrek Research. You have a stunning industry sector chart that in red shows you the max overweight of technology. What does Nick Colas do with the reality of a persistent tech overweight?
Yes, it is dramatic, and it's obviously, we're talking about the S&P 500 versus anything else, any other index anywhere in the world, MSCI Europe, Japan, emerging markets, everything. Tech is a heavyweight in the U.S. more than any place else, and the bottom line is you have to live with it. And there's a reason why these companies have gotten so big. They are disruptive innovators at scale, and they own most of the internet. And it's really hard to back away from that. Here in the U.S., we talk about it a lot as a negative. When I visit clients in Europe, everybody resolutely thinks it's a positive. And they think, thank God for U.S. equities, because if there weren't for the S&P 500, I'd be stuck owning MSCI Europe, earning 5 to 8%. instead of owning the U.S., which is compounding at 13. So we think of it as a problem here. Nobody else thinks it's a problem.
And it's funny because my personal opinion is one of the reasons we have such a robust tech business is because of the government. The government has historically taken a light touch to regulating technology, which in my opinion, has allowed Silicon Valley to become Silicon Valley. Whereas in Europe, I've got SAP, I've got ASML, and I think that's it.
A little Infineon, but yes.
Little Infineon, okay. So we'll see how that plays out going forward. You've got something in your note which Tom referenced, offshore gambling odds on the presidential elections. Are they important? Are they impacting the market?
It's funny, I've followed prediction markets for years, back to Predict It, some of the original Iowa analysis, and I've never seen as much interest in this as right now in this election. The prediction markets, the banking markets have really blown up, and I wonder how isolated or insulated they are from influence from people who know that they're now affecting capital markets.
Well, there's people putting gazillions of dollar trades into one of the predicted markets. Nick Colas, is it you?
Sadly, it is not me. Polymarket is the big market for that, and I think there's been reports of a whale buying between $30 and $40 million of Trump trades, and evidently he's a sophisticated French investor, French trader. And I've wondered, and I've written this, I wonder how much perhaps people are influencing the Trump contract because they know it spills over into peso and bank stocks and the yield curve and the long end of the yield curve. I wonder how accurate prediction markets will be now that they're hooked up to the rest of the financial system.
Interesting. So, I mean, as an investor, how do you think about this U.S. election? It feels kind of binary a little bit. Depending on who wins the election, there's different policies there. And is that factoring into your investment outlook?
The way we described it to clients was there's a very clear set of Trump trades because we saw what happened in the market after he won in 2016. Yield curve backed up, financials ripped, energy ripped. It's a very clear trade, and it's kind of happening right now. There's not as clear a Harris or Biden trade because when Biden was elected in 2020, we're in the middle of a pandemic. The vaccines were rolling out in between election day and the rest of the year. There's no clear Harris trade, right? But there is a clear Trump trade, which I think has forced people to say, okay, at least we know what to do if he wins. And that's why they've been working a Trump trade, because there's some clarity there versus no clarity with Harris.
What are you doing? What is the Nick Colas action to invest new money in the stock market, looking out 6 months, looking out a year, 2 years?
Yeah, the way we're looking at it is let's sort of get past the election. So we're talking about, like I said, a 1 to 2 year time frame. And there the playbook is pretty straightforward for us. It's long U.S. equities, it's small caps for a trade, it's financials, it's industrials. But really be very careful with Europe, Japan, and EM, because aside from China, there's not a lot good going on there.
Nick, you and I have talked about this before. They're the brats out in Silicon Valley. Everything's great. They got ping pong. What are the foosball? They got foosball machines in the lobby. DataTrek doesn't have that, folks. And all of a sudden, they've grown up. Thank you, Mr. Zuckerberg. And we saw it yesterday with Google margins coming in. Excuse me, folks, and gasping off the plague. Headcount coming in as well. There's a new sobriety in tech. Can you invest in that new sobriety?
I think it is certainly helpful. It improves return on capital. It improves margins. It shows that there's some grown-ups in the room with some discipline, and that's great. But ultimately, you're buying tech for Gen AI and for the next level of autonomous driving and a whole bunch of other things. The only thing the market consistently gets wrong in any sector is in technology, because it's so hard to predict the future of technology. So if you look at 10-year returns, tech has it over everything by a wide margin because the market doesn't know what's coming next. In every other sector, it's a lot harder.
I've got a Fed that's cutting rates. They cut initially by 50 basis points, yet my 2-year Treasury, I'm getting 4.14%. What happened there? I mean, I'm an equity guy, so I have no idea what's going on.
Yeah, the issue is economic growth picked up.
Okay.
And it still remains strong. We see it with the ADP numbers. We see it with the GDP numbers. Even though they're a little bit light versus expectations, they're still very robust.
Well, let's review that. 3%, 2.9% was a survey. It comes in 2.8%. And I'm looking, Paul, it's like a big red light going on. Personal consumption, 3.7%. In the old days, that's a boom economy, right, Nick?
Yes. I mean, this is one of those what else do you need to know kind of reports. You look at this and say, fine, I know everything I need to know for the next 90 days.
So what are you doing, I guess, in the near term? Like, for the next week, are you just telling clients, just de-risk to the extent you can de-risk until we figure out what's going to happen in a week?
We try very hard not to play the game that way.
Okay.
Because some of our clients are traders. My background is to some degree in trading, so we are telling them, okay, this is why yields have backed up and the financials have worked and energy has worked. So if you're long those trades, lighten up, because who knows. But aside from that, we try very hard to say, look, ultimately, like the Larry Summers quote is right. Europe's a museum, Japan's a nursing home, China's a prison, and the U.S., he didn't say this, but this is my addendum, the U.S. is a business.
So who's the quote there?
Larry Summers.
Okay. Say that again, though.
Europe's a museum, Japan's a nursing home, China's a prison.
All right.
And my addendum to it is America is a business. And the reason American markets work better than others is simply because they overwhelm the political side.
20 seconds. Near Eastern archaeology. Can there be a new Syria?
Ooh. I think what archaeology is helping more than anything else is that empires rise and fall, but they're very unpredictable. And you can have empires that go 2,000 years like Egypt. So it's facile to say, okay, the Roman Empire only lasted a couple hundred years. There are examples of things lasting a really long time.
Nick Colas, including Bloomberg Surveillance. Nick Colas, thank you so much. DataTrek Research, just really, really important. We'll feature him in Single Best Idea, our podcast out today. Futures up 2 with our news in New York City, Michael Barr.
Thank you very much, Tom, Paul, John. Kamala Harris argued a second Donald Trump presidency would be steeped in chaos and division as she rallied voters from the National Mall.
If you give me the chance to fight on your behalf, there is nothing in the world that will stand in my way.
Meanwhile, former President Trump held a rally in Allentown, Pennsylvania.
Next Tuesday, you have to stand up and you have to tell Kamala that you've had enough. You're not going to take it anymore. Kamala, you're fired. Get out. Get out of here. You're fired.
Only 6 days are left until Election Day. The Supreme Court has rejected a push to remove Robert Kennedy Jr.'s name from the ballot in 2 critical battleground states, Michigan and Wisconsin. Kennedy was trying to get his name off the ballot after he dropped out of the race. He has since endorsed former President Donald Trump. Kennedy says Trump has promised him control of the government's public health agencies.
The key that I think that President Trump has promised me is control of the public health agencies, which are HHS and its sub-agencies, CDC, FDA, NIH, and a few others, and then also the USDA.
Kennedy made the remarks on a Zoom call with supporters. Israel is considering a U.S.-led deal to end the conflict in Lebanon and move Hezbollah fighters away from the Israeli border after assessing the militant group's rocket arsenal has been mostly expended or destroyed. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu met top aides to discuss a fresh proposal from Washington. Anthony Volpe's third-inning grand slam overcame Freddie Freeman's record-setting home run, and the New York Yankees avoided a World Series sweep with an 11-4 win over the Los Angeles Dodgers. It forced a Game 5 tonight in the Bronx. Freeman homered for the 6th straight series game. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr, and this is Bloomberg. Tom, Paul, John.
Thanks so much. Joining us now, surveillance congestion correspondent, pro-jaywalker John Tucker joins us here. Okay, New York Times here. Jaywalking is a New York tradition. Now it's legal too. John Tucker, thoughts?
Cross at the green, not in between. And I'm serious when I say that, because as a driver and as a pedestrian, when you're crossing the crosswalks, the cars, as they're making a left especially, they're between the windshield and the window, your left window, there's that bar coming down.
Yeah, you got a Hummer H2.
You can't see them.
You got a Hummer H2. I mean, no wonder you can't.
Yeah.
But watch out for the delivery folks on bikes coming the
bikes
opposite
are
direction.
the bane of our existence. They're traveling very high speed, and
the other way.
You get hit by one of those.
I've missed a couple of them, but
here's my basic take on this.
Yep.
I jaywalk all the time. I enjoy getting a ticket literally on Rodeo Drive in LA.
I did as well. My first time in Los Angeles.
First time in LA. Guess what? This is about the kids. It's stupid legislation. The kids need discipline at the crosswalks. Good morning, everyone.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
And I'm John Tucker in the Bloomberg Newsroom with this Bloomberg Business Flash. Let's start with the latest read on third quarter GDP, coming in just a little weaker than expected at 2.8%. But make no mistake about it, that is still a robust pace for the U.S. economy. Two-year Treasury yields rising as a result, up close to 5 basis points, 4.14 on the 2-year. Also, companies added 233,000 jobs in October. That's the most in more than a year, according to the private payroll provider ADP, and this comes before the government report out on Friday. Alphabet this morning rallying more than 6% pre-market trading after the Google parent earnings beat estimates. Well, Advanced Micro Devices, that is sinking after a lackluster revenue forecast. And then you have Eli Lilly tumbling after sales of its blockbuster weight loss drug fell short of expectations. S&P futures unchanged. The Dow futures down 80. NASDAQ futures right now 6 points higher. And we check the markets for you all day long right here on Bloomberg Radio. I'm John Tucker, and that is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Paul and Tom.
Thanks so much, John. Greatly appreciate it. I went back and forth with David Gura this morning. He is prepared to really dive into the granularity of this election. Mr. Gura will be on the road reporting to Balance of Power. Joe Matthew, Kaylee Lines, joining us now. Ms. Lines, we're thrilled to have her on this morning. Kaylee, Dave Wasserman over at Cook Political Report really gets down to the granularity that Mr. Gura will be looking at with Greg Giroux, which is county by county. I'm looking at Cumberland County, west off of Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. We were just talking with Nick Colas about Bucks County, Pennsylvania. Which county in Pennsylvania has the attention of Kaylee Lines?
Well, there's any number, Tom, keeping in mind that I think Pennsylvania is the most important state in this election and its 19 electoral college votes. You're right to point to areas like Bucks County, which are suburban near Philadelphia, that have been pretty swingy in the past, though leaning more Democratic. That is where we're going to be watching to see the concentration of voters for Kamala Harris. But there's other ones to watch as well. Allegheny County in the western part of the state, Erie County, another one that we're paying attention to. This county breakdown is going to be fascinating as we consider the dynamics here that we're seeing play out that are different than the 2020 election cycle, not necessarily in states like Pennsylvania, but maybe in states like North Carolina, for example, where you've seen a lot of migration to different areas of the state that once were more rural and now have more Democratic or independent leaning voters, as we've seen people moving around since the pandemic. So there's going to be a number of areas to watch, including in Wisconsin, where David Gura is spending his time today going to be speaking with the incumbent Senator Tammy Baldwin, who is in a very tight race with her Republican challenger, Eric Hovde.
So is there any movement here over the next several days here, Kaylee? What is the expectation for the folks down in D.C. about what might change, if anything, on the margin?
The only thing that really could change on the margin at this point, Paul, is turnout and whether either of these candidates in these final 6 days, including their speeches given last night, Kamala Harris here in Washington at the Ellipse, Donald Trump in Allentown, Pennsylvania, if they're able to convince voters who might be looking to sit this one out to actually go up to the polls and cast a ballot. That's really going to be what it's about at this stage, is the vast majority of the American electorate has already made up their mind about each of them, given that they are pretty well known at this point. One who has been serving as vice president for the last almost 4 years, one who was president for 4 years and has been a candidate for way longer than that. So it's really going to be about that basket of undecided voters, convincing them them to show up, which is why turnout in the ground game are things that you are hearing the most.
What's in the zeitgeist right now? I mean, Paul and I, we're like sort of paying it. Kaylee, we're more paying attention to the World Series. You're not. You're buried in the zeitgeist on this. What is the zeitgeist right now on quote-unquote turnout? What's the flavor of that, the nuance that matters?
Well, I think what's really telling is what we're seeing in early voting. Tom, which has been record-setting in a number of battleground states. In North Carolina, for example, where both of the candidates are going to be spending time today, there has already been more than 3 million people who voted. I spoke with the Secretary of State of North Carolina yesterday, and she said everything is going smoothly, including in the western areas of the state that were ravaged by Hurricane Helene. And already more than a third of the electorate has cast a vote. So that does signal that there is some enthusiasm to go and turn out. It's going to be a question of making sure in the states in which the margins are expected to be incredibly close, these battlegrounds, the 7 that could define the Electoral College, that those extra tens of thousands of votes maybe actually show up for the candidate. The other thing I will say in the zeitgeist today, Tom and Paul, is garbage. Remembering Sunday, Madison Square Garden, when a comedian who was on the stage before Donald Trump referred to Puerto Rico as an island of garbage. The buzz in Washington this morning is about a gaffe on that made by Joe Biden. In a virtual call with Voto Latino last night, he referred to Trump supporters as garbage, although the White House is saying there was an important apostrophe there, that it was supporter apostrophe S. He was just referring to this one individual.
So which geography of Puerto Rican intensity matters on balance of power? Don't tell me it's Spanish Harlem.
No, I would point you to where Donald Trump was last night, Tom. Allentown, Pennsylvania. It is highly Latino, a big concentration of Puerto Ricans, especially as a share of the vote there. It has its first Latino mayor, in fact, in Allentown, Pennsylvania in history. And when we look across the state of Pennsylvania as a whole, there's 500,000 Puerto Ricans. For a state that Joe Biden won by less than 81,000 votes in 2020, even just a share of that could be the margin that makes the difference.
What's amazing is Kaylee's the one that introduced me to Bad Bunny.
Is that right?
Yeah, she said, Tom, you're completely not hip. This is where we're going. She's teaching me about Bad Bunny and Daddy Yankee and the rest of it. It was amazing.
Kaylee, how long are you and Joe Matthew going to have to basically sleep at the Bloomberg studios in D.C. here? When are we going to know who wins this thing?
Oh, it could be some time, Paul. And actually, we'll be sleeping at the Bloomberg studios in New York. We'll be up there with you guys at headquarters for all of election week, basically for as long as it takes. And it could take some time. The North Carolina Secretary of State I referred to earlier that we spoke with on Balance of Power yesterday said you should not expect to know the result on election night. And that goes for a number of these other states. The question is really going to be to what extent the share is of mail-in ballots that take some a longer time to count in many of these states versus people who actually show up and vote in person.
So she's going to be in the Julie Andrews suite over at the Regency Hotel.
Oh, I see.
That's where Kaylee.
Very good.
That's how Kaylee.
That's how she rolls. Okay.
Julie Andrews came out the door of the Regency Hotel once on Park Avenue. Jen Tucker was speechless. I had no idea what to say to Miss Andrews. What do you say to Julie Andrews?
I have a crush on her since the Sound of Music.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Kaylee Lyons,
did you
thank
start
you
singing
so much.
Edelweiss?
Start coming in at 10. What do you think? Kaylee should slide in at 10 a.m. or
Yeah, I don't need her doing like a hit at 6:45 or.
So she's a trooper.
No,
Kaylee Lyons, thank you so much. Greatly appreciate it. Kaylee and I are asking you folks, you got to look at our survey here. We need to hear from you about Bloomberg Radio. What you need to do is go to YouTube.com/Bloomberg Podcasts. You click the link in the profile or the community section to take a survey. This is at YouTube.com/Bloomberg Podcasts. Yes, there is a line in the survey. How bad is Tom Keene? You can fill out that one. It's had a huge response. Click the link. And it's hosted by our partners Material. Fill it out now, YouTube.com/Bloomberg Podcasts, including do we need, how's the congestion reporter doing?
Right.
And,
feedback is good.
It's the feedback's there. It's, it's there, but we're serious here. We really want to know, with all this new digital distribution, what you think of Bloomberg Radio and our future. Thank you to Material for that. YouTube.com/Bloomberg
Tom, you saw in the
well.
Alphabet results, the Google results last night, how big YouTube is for Google and how quickly it's growing in terms of the advertising revenue and subscription.
I had the immense fortune of talking with Chad Hurley, who founded all of this years ago, like 15, 16, 17 years ago. Did I ever think it would be as predominant as it is? We're humbled by it each and every day. We're featuring, as Kaylee Lyons mentioned, everyone now focused on the dynamics of the Puerto Rican vote. Thank you to Kaylee for giving me bad Bunny. I'm going to butcher the pronunciation. Tidi mi pregunto.
Me pregunto.
Think so?
Me pregunto.
Yeah, it's not, John Tucker and I, we're not doing
Yeah,
it. But,
no.
what we need across all of YouTube on your morning commute today, some Bad Bunny. Good morning. This is Bloomberg Surveillance. Stay with us.
Me la voy a llevar a toa pa' un VIP, ey. Saluden a Titi, vamos a tirarnos un selfie. 6 chis, ey. Que sonrían las que ya les metían. Un VIP, ey. Saluden a Titi, vamos a tirarnos un selfie. 6 chis, que sonrían las que ya se olvidaron de mí. Me gustan mucho las Gabriela, las Patricia, las Nicole, la Sofía. Mi primera novia en Kinder María y mi primer amor se llamaba Talía.
This is Bloomberg Surveillance with Tom Keene and Paul Sweeney.
Why are we upset if we're creating jobs?
Inflation's still a thing out there for the everyday consumer.
With Lisa Mateo on markets.
The economic calendar jam-packed today.
And Michael Barr with news.
Tensions between the U.S. and China have heated up even more.
The best in economics, finance, investment, and international relations. This is Bloomberg Surveillance on Bloomberg Radio.
Good morning, everyone. Tom Keene, Paul Sweeney, Michael Barr, Lisa Mateo. She's on deep assignment, almost sabbatical. John Tucker with us today on an eventful day. And, of course, all of this moving on. The GDP report, better than good, 2.8%. The jobs formation coming up. Our conversation of the day and getting it right. Emily Rowland has been wonderful about just shut up and buy U.S. big stocks. Get over it, move on. But first, we need to go to the forensic moment for Bloomberg Surveillance. Doug Cass out on Twitter yesterday talking up the need to study forensic accounting. I happen to live some of the train wrecks with Mr. Cass that were out there. I'm not saying you're innocent until proven guilty, but I'm sorry, when Ernst & Winnie resigns as your auditor, I'm sorry, Paul, it's not good.
It's not good. Micro computer
5,000 people.
Exactly. Sinks 26% after auditor Ernst & Young resigned. Ernst & Young says they are no longer able to rely on management and audit committee representations. Wow.
I've seen this before. I don't have the book in front of me, but Doug had it. He pulled it off the shelf. I'd read it as well. But forensic accounting is something that's not important until it's important.
Yeah, and this is no small cap stock company. This got a market cap of $28 billion. It was up 72% year to date before today. So we'll have to see how this plays out. But again, trading off about 28% in pre-market trading. We'll have more reporting on that coming up.
Effects of tape. Futures -6. NASDAQ down -21, down 0.1%. The VIX 19.91. From the Interactive Broker Studios, let's get right to it. Our Bloomberg Business Flash, John Tucker.
All right, guys, Supermicro, second most actively traded stock right now. Again, 29% lower, and as you mentioned, we'll have more coming up. Right now, the futures, they are lower. Dow futures down 90, S&P E-mini futures down 6. The NASDAQ futures 28 points lower. And let's go right to yields. The 2-year, the more policy reactive 2-year yield, that is 3 basis points higher right now, 4.13. A resilient consumer, evident in the latest economic data that we got today. The economy expanding at a robust pace in the third quarter. Households and businesses standing pretty tall. Inflation-adjusted gross domestic product increasing at 2.8%. That's an annualized pace. Then some of the other individual shares on the move, aside from supermicrocomputer Eli Lilly lowering its full-year guidance on lackluster sales of its blockbuster weight loss drug. BYD, this is worth noting, notching up another win over Tesla. They are reporting quarterly revenue that beat Elon Musk's car maker for the first time since the pair have gone head-to-head in the global electric vehicle sales. And then you have right now the 2-year Treasury up 4 basis point, we'll call it, at 4.13. The 10-year yield unchanged at 2.52. Dow futures again down 87. S&P futures, they're down 7, and the Nasdaq futures right now, they are 30 points lower. And we check the markets for you all day long right here on Bloomberg Radio. I'm John Tucker, and that is your Bloomberg Business Flash, Paul and Tom.
Yeah, thanks so much. You know, we're watching a game last night, and Mrs. Keene is like, she's really getting into this. I mean, she's diehard, and you know, she's like looking in the stands at, you know, all the celebrities and where they're sitting, and that, and she's looking at like where Paul Simon and Edie sit, just to the left of the Yankees dugout. Solid. It's solid.
That's a great spot.
Emily Rowland ensconced there tonight for the John Hancock Company.
Well, they got the John Hancock seats, of course.
Well, no, that's a trading thing. When the Red Sox are in the World Series, you know, the financial people here get some seats at Fenway. Are you watching the series? Because I know you're into the Red Sox thing.
Well, I knew I was coming here this morning, so of course I got all my baseball stats lined up for you. No, of course, and I think the narrative is really, can we do the Red Sox in 2004? I'm sure a lot of New Yorkers painfully remember that.
Pocketbook out. Come on, Juan Soto in a Red Sox uniform, it makes me happy.
There you go.
We'll have to see. Emily, you're on a massive victory lap tour here. You say keep it simple. What's working, and stay with it. Yeah. When will you know the Mag 7 ballet is over?
When earnings trends shift. So we have to remember, keeping it simple, stock prices follow profits. That's the number one thing that we watch. You could look at valuations until you're blue in the face, but it's the denominator that matters a lot more. And we've seen incredible earnings strength out of high quality companies in the United States. Mega cap tech is a poster child for that. It's great return on equity, good balance sheets, better ability to maintain margins. And frankly, if you look at this quarter's earnings growth, that's what's happening. Small cap earnings are coming in at -4% year over year. That's a lower quality part of the market. Meanwhile, large caps are tracking at close to 10%. We're following the earnings.
So it's interesting because, I mean, the earnings have generally been, as you mentioned, you know, the bigger cap companies doing well. We had Google last night with some great numbers. Are earnings good enough to support this market, do you think, just broadly defined?
Well, they certainly are, but they are concentrated, and that's a risk that we want to be mindful of. But again, you know, we're clearing a low bar right now. So think about this. This is the last quarter where the street's expecting low single-digit earnings growth. From here, Q4 and into 2025, it's double-digit earnings growth that are being penciled in. The bar is going to get a lot harder to clear from here. So right now, I think we should sit back and enjoy it a little bit as companies beat those expectations.
Is there room to cut costs sector by sector?
There is, and that's the type of companies that we're looking for are ones that can maintain margins, whether it's through cost cutting or keeping those revenues elevated. That's going to be really important. There's going to be a war on margins as we contend with revenue growth normalizing, as we contend with continued cost of capital being elevated here. So the companies that can win on that front, to us, are the ones that are worth owning.
I mean, we've got oil prices tumbling, we've got treasury yields rising. That doesn't happen very often. So what do you make of all that?
Yeah, like what a strange headline to see. And I think really we're kind of process of elimination investors when we see this massive backup in bond yields, which is taking a break right now, but it's been huge. we're trying to figure out, well, what's driving it? And the first thing I always look to is the commodity market. Well, nope, that's not it. Commodities are actually ex-oil falling. WTI's hovering around $70. It's not housing. We're actually seeing disinflation finally in the housing market. Inventories are elevated to the tune of 23% year over year. So we think that's more disinflation. And wage growth is falling. So none of the normal things that would cause this backup in bond yields are playing out. And frankly, I don't even think it's really better than expected economic growth, because the PMIs, which are the most timely business surveys we watch, are pretty much flat.
Right.
And GDP has been hovering around 3% for some time. So I think
Right.
it's the Trump trade.
11 minutes ago, off the GDP report, the laureate Paul Krugman puts out a chart. It's normalized back pre-pandemic, and it's what CBO was guessing GDP would be, and it's what GDP actually was. And Professor Krugman says, if this is policy failure, what would success look like? Okay, so we've had a successful GDP. Does it sustain? That's the heart of the matter.
Well, I think it becomes challenged. The reason that you've seen, I think, such strong growth is because we're spending like crazy. And by the way, this is not a political statement. I'm not really supposed to have those. It's just happening. And it's remarkable.
3.7% consumption is the first look.
Yeah. The consumer is incredibly strong. You're seeing that throughout things like retail sales, through services, PMIs. But we are spending to the tune of almost 7% of GDP. Usually you employ fiscal stimulus and increase the size of the deficit on a counter-cyclical basis, meaning to get us out of a recession. And right now we're doing it with close to full employment, and inflation's still not back down to the Fed's 2% target. This is wild.
There's floating out there in the zeitgeist that long-only mutual funds loading the boat on Mag 7, plus Mag 7 has grown, may be forced to lighten up on positions. Do you think that'll actually happen?
Well, the challenge is potentially because it's hard to be overweight a lot of these names given the size that they have in these benchmarks. I've gotten into a bunch of discussions with investors lately about whether, for example, they should own the India stock market. I'm like, well, NVIDIA is about 20 times the size of the entire stock market.
Paul,
so
what do you
maybe
think?
we start there.
Paul, SEC or state regulators tell John Hancock they got to sell X% of their NVIDIA or Meta because it's just too big?
Yeah, I can't imagine. But I mean, so Emily, that kind of goes to the issue here. I mean, we had a guest in here earlier says, if you're just not long tech, you can't even be in the game if you're not long tech. You can't worry about valuation.
Are you in the American game?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. I think it's important, and that's a reason we've been overweight U.S. versus international equities, because there's not much of a tech sector there. I walked into an investor's office the other day, and they had all these oil paintings covering their walls of all the famous value investors, Benjamin Graham and Shelby Davis, and my heart kind of sank when I walked in there because I knew they hadn't owned technology names. So I think you've had to be there, but I do think it would be nice and healthy to see a broadening out of the market here. We do also like areas like mid caps, which have great earnings estimates, and they're trading at cheaper valuations.
20 seconds. We're doing a survey. How many new iPhones is a Roland household bought?
I can't even begin. You've just touched on the biggest hot button issue in my household right now.
Agreed.
Getting it fixed versus begging for the new
toy.
model.
Are you going to get a case?
I'm not doing any of it. I'm sending my 14-year-old to the mall to get his charger port fixed. That's it. It's over. Sorry, Gib.
Tough.
I know. Tough
My
talk in
word.
that
Not doing
household.
it.
Can you stop by our house today and start lecturing afterthought? Really? You're sending the 14-year-old slinking over to the mall?
Well, believe me, he's going to buy a $23 Chipotle burrito while he's there, too, with the double steak. So we'll be spending plenty on that front.
That's what Michael Barr likes best. Emily Rowland, thank you so much. With our news in New York City, Michael Barr, king of Chipotle.
Thank you very much, Tom, Paul, John. Later today, the Kamala Harris campaign will run through the battleground states of North Carolina, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. Harris held a campaign rally last night near the White House with 1 week left until Election Day. The vice president telling the crowd, quote, "We know who Donald Trump is."
He is the person who stood at this very spot nearly 4 years ago and sent an armed mob to the United States Capitol to overturn the will of the people in a free and fair election. An election that he knew he lost.
Former President Trump has a rally today in Green Bay, Wisconsin, featuring legendary Packers quarterback Brett Favre. Last night in Allentown, Pennsylvania, Trump made a visit days after a rally at Madison Square Garden where a speaker labeled Puerto Rico a floating island of garbage. Trump didn't mention the remarks, but touted what he says is his support from the community.
You know, it's interesting because I've done more for Puerto Rico than any president by far, nobody close. I provided historic funding and the hospital ship when they were hit with a couple of really bad ones right in the road. We got the ship over there.
About 51 million people have already voted. At least 52 people have been killed by a flash flood in Spain in the Valencia region. A month's worth of rain fell in an hour. Global news 24 hours a day, and whenever you want it, with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr, and this is Bloomberg. Tom, Paul, John.
Oh, Michael, I have failed. We've been so wound up with baseball and all that. How are the Lions doing?
How are the Lions doing? Don't you see my chest puffed out this big? We are leading in the NFC. I love it, man. We're leading in the NFC.
We're 2 days out from countdown to the Thanksgiving Day football game.
That's right.
Do you eat during the game, or do you wait till after that 12 noonish start?
I try not to eat during the game.
6-1, and it's a great conference.
It is.
I mean, it's like they're
everybody's above 500 there.
Getting it done. That's your football talk, folks. We'll do more Yankees Dodgers here in a moment. On YouTube, subscribe to us, please. Bloomberg Surveillance, New York City.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
And I'm John Tucker at the Bloomberg Newsroom with this Bloomberg Business Flash being brought to you by IBKR. The markets never sleep, neither does Interactive Brokers. Discover opportunities with CME Group's futures across equity indexes, interest rates, FX, energy, and more. Access CME futures around the clock at Interactive Brokers. Of course, the big story of the morning, Supermicro Computer. This comes in a regulatory filing. The company reveals its auditor, Ernst & Young, has resigned. It comes after review after Ernst & Young communicated concerns about several matters relating to governance, transparency, and internal control over financial reporting. Remember, this was a stock that was close to $120 a share back in March, and this morning, Supermicro Computer shares the most actively traded in the pre-market. Right now, they are down 32% at 33.25. And just real quick, some of the economic data that we got this morning ahead of the jobs report on Friday. It's strong. The U.S. economy growing by 2.8% in the third quarter. Consumer spending rising 3.7%. That is the most since early last year. Right now, ahead of the cash open on Wall Street, Dow futures down 55. The S&P E-mini futures 5 points lower. The NASDAQ futures right now down 25. Two-year yield up 3 basis points. That is at 4.12. The 10-year yield right now down a basis point. That is at 4.23. We check the markets for you all day long right here on Bloomberg Radio. I'm John Tucker, and that is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Paul and Tom.
John Tucker, thanks so much. This is perfectly timed. You get lucky. You book people. I'm like, why is Gina Martin Adams on? Or
Yeah.
And then, all of a sudden it's like, wow, we got Gina Martin Adams. Perfect timing. Joining us, Gina Martin Adams, Bloomberg Intelligence and Stocks, and Phil Newhart, Director of Market and Economic Research at First Citizens, a joint conversation. Somewhere in the tunnels of Whitefried-Sandy in CFA 101 is the idea of revenue recognition in what desperate people will do. And one of the great things is people that had a shipping dock in LA and they loaded the truck with bricks.
Yep.
And drove it around the block and called that revenue recognition. That's where we are. Gina, let me start with you because Phil doesn't want to talk about this representing First Citizens Bank.
Yeah,
but
this is good.
Revenue recognition is serious stuff. I mean, it's inside baseball, but I'm sorry, this is serious stuff.
It is, and it's particularly serious in an environment where revenue growth has been very concentrated in certain industries and certain segments, and that the pressure is extremely high on companies to meet the revenue bar, in particular AI-oriented companies inside technology, where all of the growth has come from. Also, the valuations have started to expand, and that creates a lot of pressure for companies to meet those
NVIDIA's
expectations.
got a card. And they recognize revenue when it's shipped, I'm going to assume.
Right.
But what do you do with software? What do you do with intangibles? What do you do with the new tech wisdom out there? There's no shipping dock.
Yeah. Well, this is why we have accounting analysts all over the world, right? We have actually one that we were just talking about this in our team just yesterday because we have an accounting analyst. He's based in Asia, but he runs what's called a Benesh M score. For those speaking of CFA, the Benesh M score is a composition of 8 different indicators that give us a sense of a company's accounting aggressiveness versus their sort of conservatism. And it's actually a fantastic indicator of potential issues from an accounting perspective that tend to pop up. It's taught in CFA for a reason. We use a lot of different indicators, but I think it's worth paying attention to accounting. It has surfaced many issues in the past. We look at the most conservative accounting companies and compare those to the least conservative accounting companies, and we actually find that the most conservative companies over time are higher quality companies that tend to perform best. So it's absolutely worth paying attention to. I don't want to call out any specific companies. That's definitely not within our mandate.
Understood.
But you do have to pay attention to accounting. As uncomfortable as it is for people like us who would much rather pay attention to macro and markets at large, accounting does
And
matter.
the foundation of this off Fordham and Paul, particularly off Baruch, and thanks to Doug Cass, perfect. I mean, Cass, he wasn't thinking last. He's doing accounting forensics because the Yankees were in the tank. So now he's in more. But Benjamin Breloff, I mean, he was at Baruch College, and the answer is, Abraham Breloff. And his books are just iconic from years ago when this stuff was front and center.
All right, speaking of accounting, it is earnings season. I want to bring in Phil Newhart, again, Director of Market and Economic Research at First Citizens Bank and Trust, all the way from Raleigh, North Carolina. What are you making of earnings so far this cycle, Phil? Are they supportive of this market?
Yeah, pretty good, pretty supportive. 75% of companies are beating. We're seeing operating margins hang in there. I think third consecutive quarter in which operating margins are going to expand most likely. And you're seeing a beat not just on earnings, but on revenue as well from a macro perspective.
Martin Adams called it.
There have been, that's right, always does. There has been obviously some noise around certain names, but generally pretty good. We still have some big names to come this week, but starting last night, of course, margin expansion continues, and that's what the market cares about.
All right, so earnings are front and center, but I've got the Fed, I think, is cutting rates. They cut it by 50 basis points, but then when I wander into this bond market, I say yields higher, sharply higher. What's going on out there?
Well, you have to reset expectations after that really solid employment report, right? Okay. 2 cuts came out of Fed funds futures in terms of the pace at which the Fed would cut. At one point, futures were pricing 10 total quarter-point cuts. We were never buyers of that, felt that would be under that. Now they're pricing total of 7.5 or so. Mm-hmm. So the yield curve has to price that. What you are seeing also is, I think, some election noise within the yield curve. That's probably part of the story as well. Once we get past, once we get past the election next week, and of course get past the Fed as well, that could help see the bond market settle down. Right now, we're seeing, if you look at the MOVE index on your Bloomberg, highest volatility in fixed income that we've seen all year.
Interesting. Gina, what is screening well for you guys as you parse through these earnings?
Yeah, I mean, I just want to sort of emphasize a point that Philip made, and that is the market is still going higher, even though the bond market has experienced a lot of readjustment. And I think the point of that is the market continues to go higher because growth conditions continue to improve and earnings growth continues to generally improve. What really stood out for us so far this earnings season is financials. I mean, we're looking at a close to 90% beat rate out of financials. Expectations still very low. As the yield curve moves off of that incredibly deep inversion, it's also resulted in some re-rating of this sector. It's one of the least loved sectors in our view, so it's definitely worth taking another look as estimates remain pretty grim for the foreseeable future. The other side of the spectrum is really within tech and the communication space, how high the expectations bar is. And obviously you've got companies like Alphabet last night that beat that expectation significantly across the board. Every segment of that report was a beat, and that's fantastic. That's what's going to be required for the most part, I think, for these stocks to keep working. So again, that bar is high, that expectations bar is very meaningful. And right now, expectations for financials are among the lowest.
Are we overweight, Phil? Are we overweight Mag 7? Institutionally, we're really not, are we?
Well, you have to own them, right? The question is, are you slightly overweight, slightly underweight? In terms of our allocation portfolios, we are overweight large cap growth. Right, we continue to believe there's pricing power. These companies have incredible market share, right, as regulators are continuing to point out, and pricing power, and that helps margins. So we do remain bullish large cap growth. But that said, we are also looking at broadening, right? We have seen broadening since the middle of the year. If you look at the equal weight S&P 500, it's outperformed the cap weighted. Right. So we do like other segments of the market. We have moved more overweight small cap, for example, after a long-standing large cap overweight.
I don't remember studying this for CFA. The Benish.
Oh, the M score. Oh.
It's like newer, I guess.
You got to refresh that education every now and again.
I did it with a slide rule. You know, what can I say? There's Tata.
My team educates me every single day.
Yeah, exactly.
I gotta get the news.
This is Tata, income from continuing operations minus cash flows from operations is compared to total assets. It's like a 15 ratio statistic out of Indiana University.
Yeah, enjoy. You can enjoy your reading for the rest of the week.
I mean, the kids are teaching us every day.
I know.
Kids like Phil are teaching us every day.
It's incredible, honestly. It's really incredible.
Yeah.
Remember, there was the Z-score.
That's right. Yeah.
Accruals? Remember accruals when that was the hot factor?
Accruals is a huge factor.
On earnings quality.
Phil's never studied once in his life LIFO, FIFO. Been there. Thank you so much. This is the accounting portion of Bloomberg Surveillance as thousands turn off the radio. Stay with us on radio, on YouTube, Bloomberg Surveillance.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
And I'm John Tucker in the Bloomberg Newsroom with this Bloomberg Business Flash. The opening bell report being brought to you by JP Morgan Asset Management. Stay informed on today's fastest growing investment vehicle with a new guide to ETFs. Visit jpmorgan.com/ETF insights to learn more. There you have it, the opening bell at the New York Stock Exchange. Right out of the gate, we are lower. The S&P 500 down 3 points. Dow Jones Industrial Average, that is down 53 points right now. And as we wait for the first trades on the NASDAQ right now, the NASDAQ Composite Index, after a record close yesterday in the early going, 14 points higher. Let's get you a quote on the story of the day. Supermicrocomputer, those shares right now, they are down. Supermicrocomputer down close to 30% after their auditor, Ernst & Young, quit. And we check the markets for you all day long right here on Bloomberg Radio. That is the opening bell report for this Wednesday morning. Paul and Tom.
Thanks so much, John. Greatly appreciate it this morning. This is what surveillance is about, folks. We codified this decades ago. I can't say enough about we move when the story moves. Joining us in 14 minutes, Woo Jin Ho will join us. He is expert on supermicrocomputer with Bloomberg Intelligence. We're thrilled he's freed up his schedule to speak to us. Paul, why don't you bring a guest in here on the shadows of private credit?
I tell you, this is, again, I've kind of been in this investment game for 35 years. One of the most amazing developments to me has been, in addition to ETFs, this private credit business. You know, we all grew up with private equity, but private credit has become just an extraordinary alternative investment opportunity for a lot of investors, particularly after the great financial crisis when some of the banks were pulling back on their lending. And kind of what I know about this business, I learned from our next guest, Randy Schwimmer, Vice Chairman, Investor Solutions Group, Churchill Asset Management, most notably from the JP Morgan Chase corporate banking business and loan syndication business. That's
long time ago, Paul.
That's where you learn credit, and that's where I learned my credit chops there at Chase Manhattan Bank. Randy, we got interest rates coming down, although the yield curve is steepening, but interest rates generally coming down. The Fed's lowering rates. What does that mean for the private credit business?
By the way, a shout out to James Crombie and your Credit Edge podcast. I'll be, if you want 60 minutes of me and private credit, tune in tomorrow for that. So, yeah, rates are probably coming down. Spreads across the credit spectrum, as you guys have reported, are tightening. The Bloomberg high yield spread index is below 3%. I mean, that's a little bit nutty when you look at what, you know, the potential risks over the next 6 months are. But really, capital markets are wide open. And in the midst of all this, private credit is actually, according to JP Morgan report that they put out a couple days ago, credit spreads in private credit have actually increased by 25 basis points. Now, let's think about that in the context of everything going on. Part of what's going on is that the broadly syndicated market, which we know has been more active this year than ever, has been able to affect the large cap market, the large middle market deals. But in the traditional middle market, in the direct lending market that Churchill's in, spreads have actually gone up a little bit. Why is that? Deal flow is starting to come back. I always like bringing stats into you guys every month. Global M&A up quarter over quarter by 9%, according to S&P. Year over year, 23%. So as deal flow increases, people can be more picky. So they, like us, say, hey, I'd rather take something a little more spread, a little more protections for our investors. So spreads are actually coming up. The other thing that's going on is the illiquidity premium between liquid markets, the broadly syndicated loan market, private credit, has actually widened to a 5-month high.
Right.
So very attractive for investors right now.
Right where I want to go to. I want this explained. Randy, you're the best to do this. Everybody's concerned, even people supporting private equity, private credit. We intuitively get in private equity, you buy something, it's locked up for 7 years, whatever. You got to wait to get out. Then when you get out, you can't get out. It's intuitive in equity. It's not in your world. Now, you just discovered that. What is the lockup in private credit that needs to be analyzed, studied, calmed, or concerned about?
Yeah, so you're pointing to the issue of liquidity, right? And illiquidity, which has tended to be viewed as a negative in markets that are very correlated, and we saw that in spades, in 22 and a little bit in 23, tends to be a negative for investors because they want something that's an alternative to the correlated assets of public equities and fixed income. And so they seek alternatives, including private capital, to get a little bit more calm during periods of stress and turmoil. So what's happening for private credit investors is that the valuations associated with our loans tend to be a lot more stable during periods of volatility. And so what they're trading for in terms of lack of being able to trade on demand is the ability that during a crisis, they don't see the kinds of moves in prices that we're seeing now. Oh, yeah. All of our loans are valued by third-party agencies, and so it's not just us valuing them, but they're valued by others as well as the fundamentals of these companies. They're not traded the way that the broadly syndicated loans are. But the fundamental difference, I think, now is that with the M&A market opening up, these loans are going to start to trade more often in the sense that deals are going to start to get done and refinanced. Private equity, which has been stalled, to your point, because capital has been locked in with these deals where LPs are stuck because they haven't seen realizations. Now those realizations are going to start to come, and I think we're going to see more of that next year.
You guys get a gajillion pitch books coming through your door every year. How do you screen them? What do you like these days?
Well, we get about 1,000 deals a year coming from our private equity friends. As I told you before, we're an investor in their funds. So these are kind of pre-screened transactions. We could probably do all of them and be fine, but some of them fit better into our credit book, right? So some are more equity-like, high growth, and in the credit world, as you know, you're getting paid principal and interest, so you just want to be, it's not being first or second, it's finishing the race. What we're looking for is kind of what we've been looking for, which is defensive industries, sectors such as, you mentioned accounting firms, regional firms in this business. We're going around that right now. It's very steady Eddie. Doesn't matter what the tax rates or tariffs are, you still need FIFO and LIFO. So I think that business services are really good right now in terms of what we're seeing.
With Churchill Asset Management, Randy Schwimmer with us right now. Looking at Google up $10 to a 179 and off the trading range going back to midsummer, I'm going to call it. That was where Sweeney took 3 Fridays in a row off.
Yep.
Back then, there are 3.8 standard deviations. I think we can say surge is appropriate.
Yeah, surge is appropriate. Randy, talk to us about the private equity world. What are you seeing from your private equity clients in terms of deal flow? When we hear Jamie Dimon and Brian Moynihan of the big, Wall Street banks thing, activity's picking up. They feel more bullish about activity. Are you seeing that in your book?
So our platform, we do private credit. We have a junior capital co-invest and fund-to-fund business. We also have a secondaries business, which is actually one of our fastest growing. And going to the point that Tom mentioned about liquidity, when these investors and some of the GPs are stuck, the secondaries market has been one of the fastest growing in the private equity space because realizations are slow. And so if you're an investor in a fund or if you're a GP with a sponsor, you're kind of looking for ways out. And you can create liquidity through the investments that you have and the portfolios that you've created, because the enterprise value that's there is being tapped by firms like Churchill to be able to help them access liquidity when otherwise they couldn't. So the sophistication and technology in private equity now has changed so much since the old days when you basically had a portfolio company. If it's stuck and you can't sell it, that's it. But today you can actually transfer value into, for example, another fund that you control. So these co-invest vehicles are red hot right now.
Give us a comparison yield. I think it's something I'm ignorant about. What's a blended yield of a private credit Churchill transaction versus high yield versus 4.x% 10-year full faith
so I
credit?
mentioned the illiquidity premium. So you're about 200 basis points differential in private credit relative to liquid loans, number one. So you're probably another 50, 100 basis points above the high yield bond market, okay? Because think about where your high yield Bloomberg spreads are right now. And then if you look at private equity, depending on, we're sort of a top tier investor focusing on top tier firms, you're looking at 20+% returns for the best private equity sponsors. So you have the ability as an investor to choose with our platform stream of income that's safe because you're top of the capital structure, secured by all the assets, senior credit, but then you can migrate up the risk spectrum to get more yield.
Right.
And what investors are looking now for is, how do you adapt in the current climate? How do you adapt when things are uncertain? How do you adapt when markets can be volatile? And there's a safe harbor that's been created, and that's why you're seeing the growth that you do.
I'll get one more in here.
Real quick, one of the things, regulations, I see the FTC and the DOJ blocking a lot of the big deals. Are you seeing that as a headwind?
Well, again, private credit tends to be a little bit of a different environment because these companies are privately held, they're not rated, they're not traded, and private equity sponsors have been looking at industries that they like for like a decade that are smaller. These are medium-sized companies. These are companies.
These are small companies.
Revenues,
So you don't have to worry about that.
yeah, exactly.
That makes sense.
And you're doing the James Crombie podcast.
Tomorrow. Check it out.
Check it out, folks. Crombie's like the real deal.
Credit Edge.
I'm taking notes from Credit Edge. I'm taking notes from James Crombie. That's really special for Global Wall Street. Randy Schwimmer, Churchill, and James Crombie. Look for that, of course, at Bloomberg podcast. Right now, with our news in New York City, he bought Google cheaper. Michael Barr.
Thank you very much, Tom, Paul, and John. Kamala Harris and Donald Trump are heading right back out to the battleground states with 6 days left until the election. Bloomberg's Kaylee Lyons has more from Washington.
Later this morning, Harris is going to be traveling to Raleigh, North Carolina. Her vice presidential nominee will be speaking in North Carolina as well, and they'll be crisscrossing all of the other battleground states, keeping in mind that in states like North Carolina and many of these swing states, there's already been a significant chunk of the electorate that has voted. In North Carolina, the Secretary of State told me yesterday more than 3 million people have already cast their ballot early. That's more than a third of the entire voting population in the state. So while they will be trying to hit potentially personality issues, policy issues as well in these final 6 days, it may be a little bit too late for most voters for that to actually resonate.
Bloomberg's Kaylee Lyons reports Harris will also campaign today in Pennsylvania and Wisconsin with a rally in the capital, Madison, featuring the folk rock band Mumford & Sons. Donald Trump has a rally today in Green Bay, Wisconsin, alongside legendary Packers quarterback Brett Favre. Public safety officials across the country are taking steps to protect the voting process. In battleground Arizona, Maricopa County Sheriff Russ Skinner says they will have zero tolerance when it comes to criminal activity related to the election.
We've been planning this for over a year. We've sat down, we've had communication across all channels, public safety, and obviously our government entities relative to this.
Meanwhile, local and federal officials continue to search for a suspect believed to have set 2 ballot drop box fires on Monday in Oregon and Washington. The New York Yankees avoided a World Series sweep with an 11-4 win over the Los Angeles Dodgers. It forced a Game 5 tonight in the Bronx. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr. This is Bloomberg. Tom, Paul, John.
I'm conflicted. I'm just miserable about this.
Are you? Well,
Mrs. Keene's all Yankees.
Yep.
She's like mental Yankees.
Good for her.
She knows the entire, she knows who's, she's like, why are the Dodgers pitching relief? The Yankees have relief. Garrett Cole tonight.
Yes.
Yeah,
He's got to step up, maybe more than 88 pitches if asked to do so.
That's your Bloomberg Surveillance Sports Report. Me and Paul going on and on and on. Always the Bloomberg Sports Report. It's brought to you by Audi. Visit your tri-state Audi dealer today and get behind the wheel of the Audi model you've always wanted. Can I do an endorsement? Best car I ever owned.
Really?
Ever.
Wow.
Ever. Audi.
Nice wheels. I know.
Ever.
The Nash?
No, it was before the Nash. It was
before the Bentley, the surveillance.
Well, way
Bentley.
before the Bentley, but it was before the Nash, and we still have the Nash. Actually, the Nash is great in snow, and John, we've hardly had any snow.
No,
this is all there is.
Knock on wood,
to
another
it.
year, no snow.
Down, -48 from New York City. We're on YouTube. Subscribe to Bloomberg Podcasts. Bloomberg Surveillance.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
And I'm John Tucker in the Bloomberg Newsroom with this Bloomberg Business Flash. Let's start you with the most active stock this morning. Supermicrocomputer is tumbling right now. Those shares are down close to 31%. Ernst & Young resigned as the auditor to the server maker. They're citing concerns about the company's governance and transparency. And not to miss, Woo Jin Ho at Bloomberg Intelligence is going to break it down for everybody in just a minute. Google parent Alphabet up 5% early going, revenue jumping 16%. The third quarter net income of $212 a share far exceeded projections. And Eli Lilly lowering its guidance due to lackluster sales of its weight loss drug Zepbound and the diabetes drug Mounjaro, which missed estimates by nearly $900 million. Lilly shares down close to 13%. And then the economic news, the economy expanding at a robust pace in the third quarter as household purchases accelerated ahead of the election and the federal government ramped up defense spending. Right now, the S&P 500, 10 points lower, 58.22 on the index. The Dow, 11 points higher. The NASDAQ right now, NASDAQ Composite Index after yesterday's record close is 47 points lower. We check the markets for you all day long right here on Bloomberg Radio. I'm John Tucker, and that is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Paul and Tom.
Paul Sweeney started the show on Le Shake Shack, the next Dow component, up $10.
I know.
They've reduced wait times. You think there's a little bit of Starbucks messaging there?
I think there might be.
That's W-A-I-T or W-E-I-G? Never mind. Bad joke.
Over here, but actually more than accurate. When we invented Bloomberg Surveillance, folks, this is what it's about. When the facts change, we change. Ira Jersey slotted in, Kaylee Line slotted in, always strong. And then Paul said, Tom, shut up. Woo Jin Ho, let's go. Supermicrocomputer, down 30%, John Tucker tells us. We are thrilled to bring you from Bloomberg Intelligence, expert on this area, Woo Jin Ho. Woo, let me start with something just basic, if I can. How will this shock affect NVIDIA?
Hey, Tom. So I think there might be a little bit of impact on NVIDIA. You have to keep in mind that there's a bigger ecosystem of server vendors that's out there. So if they can't sell it to Supermicro, they'll find someone else to do it, someone like a Dell or a Foxconn or a Pegatron.
So, Woojin, again, we got the Supermicrocomputer. The stock's down 30% pre-market. Their auditor resigns. Can you tell our listeners and our viewers who Supermicrocomputer is and kind of where do they fit into the technology kind of stack out there for everybody?
Yeah, so, by way of background, Supermicro is almost like a custom computer manufacturing shop. Essentially what they do is they manufacture computers, servers for hyperscale cloud customers. And they were very early on in making GPU-based or NVIDIA-based servers, and they really rode that AI tailwind, from a $3 billion company on annual revenues, and they were supposed to be on pace to be at $30 billion in revenues for fiscal 2025. So they were one of the poster childs for AI and AI hardware over the last year, up until their filing delays.
And Wooch, this isn't a new issue for the company, accounting issues. Thanks to our good friend Ed Ludlow out in San Francisco, Bloomberg Television. He gave us a little timeline here. In August 2020, SMCI, this company, settled an SEC accounting probe way back then. And then in April 24, a former employee alleges misstatement of revenue. August of 24, Hindenburg published a short report on the company. September this year, the SMCI reported that the DOJ is investigating it, and now the auditor resigned. So this has been a thing for this company. How do most investors view this management team and this company?
Well, we will react on it, and the way I titled the react was that the Supermicro needs more than an auditor change for the company to work. One of the things that I did write was that, look, there's no diversification on the board or not many independent board members. There needs to be a board overhaul, in my view, quite frankly, given how E&Y described their resignation. They called out integrity issues. There may need to be a CFO and possibly a CEO change if Supermicro really wants to be where they want to be.
Well, my amateur take on this is revenue recognition, and it's, I don't want to mention any companies because I'm not expert on this, but basically loading up bricks into a truck running around Los Angeles, and that's revenue. Is this a revenue recognition issue? Is this a vanilla accounting issue? Or is it something that I can't understand?
No, I don't know if it's fully a rev rec issue. It could be a gross margin issue as well, and how they account for the cost of goods sold, right? Could gross margin be inflated? The one thing that I will say from a rev rec standpoint is that it would have been really, really tough for Supermicro to just make up sales, primarily because NVIDIA was very active in the selling process, right? You need to sell those GPUs somewhere, and Supermicro would sell it for them. So for part and parcel, I think it would have been tough for it to be a revenue issue, but it could be more of a cost issue.
So you come down the income statement, Paul, and you get to gross margin and EBITDA. So Wu's telling me it's somewhere in the opaqueness between gross margin and EBITDA. How'd I do there?
Yeah, I think that
nailed that.
I think you did. That's solid from my perspective.
Sandy,
that's good enough for me. So, would you talk to us about this space here in general? How important is SMCI, Supermicro Computer? How important are they to kind of just the tech stack, maybe to AI in particular?
Yeah, so they were actually one of the leading purveyors of AI servers. Again, they were first to market with AI servers, and but what we start to see is a broader ecosystem of vendors. Dell has become a meaningful player. I think they're on pace to have about $10 billion in AI sales, but you're starting to see the Taiwanese EMS manufacturers come up with AI servers as well. So, Supermicro's prominence may start shrinking over time because of the financial issues.
And for our terminal users, SPLC, Supply Chain Analysis, shows you.
Listen to you.
I know this is one of the really cool functions on the Bloomberg terminal that a salesman taught me about long ago. It shows you who the suppliers are to Supermicro Computer, who the customers are of Supermicro Computer, and then maybe who the competitors are, the peer companies, and as Wooch was just mentioning, Dell being one of those, and maybe one of the potential beneficiaries.
One final question. Well, when you were at Rutgers, did you pass equipment leasing accounting? Did you actually figure out equipment leasing accounting?
No. Simple answer is no.
I've studied it, folks. Equipment leasing accounting. Well, I've done it at least 3 times. Like, seriously.
It's impossible.
Your world, Wu, is so darn hard. Why is accounting so hard, would you know?
Well, that's why you need CFAs to help buttress that, and Paul sitting on your side at Princeton when he was an analyst at BI.
Okay, where's the stock right now, Paul?
Yeah, looking at the stock, it's kind of off its lows here this morning, but the stock's down 27%, had been down about 32, 33%, so come back a little bit, but still, this is a company that started the day with a $20 billion market cap, so big move.
Well, thank you so much. Wu Jinho, he's got a little bit to do this morning. We really appreciate it. Worldwide, for Bloomberg Surveillance, our expert on Supermicro Computer, Wu Jinho, really just on short notice. Eric, thank you for making that happen.
Tom, this was the stock back in March, was a $180 stock, and we're trading here at $35 a share. So a huge reversal here for the stock, which was one of those AI-themed stocks, along with NVIDIA, that got swept up in a whole AI discussion. But since they've had some company-specific issues now today with the auditor resigning. Yeah.
Did you notice how I mentioned Daddy Yankee earlier?
Yeah.
Was that impression?
Sure.
Bad Bunny and Daddy Yankee and all that. We're doing Puerto Rican music today, folks, because there's a huge market and huge success. As I said, if Shakira, she did the Super Bowl years ago and just said, I'm not doing it without Puerto Rican music, and it really worked out. I'm going to, I think it's Luis Fonsi. He's like, the first time I saw the video, Despacito, I was like, wow, the craft.
Right.
Unbelievable.
I didn't know you were into it. I didn't know that was your thing.
I'm not really I'm learning. I mean, our global technical director's saying, Tom, you're an idiot. I got to take notes when Ken tells me about this. But I'm sorry, Despacito here for all of Puerto Rico nationwide.
conmigo.